remember about Zach's orientation is they took him aside and they started talking.
Nice. Ooh, I did have an interesting interaction with one of my neighbors. They're both retired city employees.
Oh my gosh,
We were
got a whole
working on
notebook.
the fence the other day.
You're
'Cause
scaring me now.
we moved our fence back and like built them a new gate.
Don't.
They came over and like we just both wanted to like thank you very much.
Part of my way of thinking.
Oh.
And
What
I
are
was
those little
like,
squares on
really?
there, Stephen?
Because obviously, like, I still didn't know what
I'm
happened.
kidding.
And so, like, they kind of, like, vaguely explained, like, what happened. And I was just like,
Didn't get the
okay. I was like, there's
That's
problems.
what's a
Like,
log sheet.
I didn't know.
This was a well
Like,
sheet.
I mean, that's not, like, common knowledge. Like, if you're not involved in the city, you don't know stuff like that. Like, yeah, I probably saw it on the news or probably read it in the paper, but it wasn't something that my brain was like, we should keep this. So, but no, they were, like, gushing. They're like, thank God. Oh, and I was like, okay.
Now we've got a big gap.
Right, I was like, a little late. Probably should have said something to me before.
Received potentially here and.
Well, we missed your Saturday night at dinner because we spoke badly about that.
Yeah, well, somebody had to not be there. Spoken badly. Heard you ate all the marshmallows.
Let's go ahead and get started. I know Ray is not coming, but I don't remember if Sean said anything about not coming, so we'll just kind of get rolling here. So, as is our custom, and I again hesitate to do this since we were here till 10:15, but last week's meeting, comments, suggestions, things that we could have done differently, things that we heard in public comment that need to be addressed in some way. Mike?
Well, Mr. Mayor, I thought you did a very, very good job handling things last week. That was just a contentious, some issues. And I really did feel that you did a good job handling that. And I'm
Well,
not
thank
just,
you.
I'm not just bubbling and being nice.
I appreciate
You know
that,
that I'm
'cause
not a nice.
Actually, I was on automatic pilot after about 9:30.
Yeah.
I just couldn't do it anymore, so thank you.
If you guys don't mind, I would like, and I don't want this to sound like I'm pontificating, I don't want it to sound like I'm a know-it-all and I know everything, because I know that I don't know everything. But I will tell you this, one thing that I learned in 32 years of being a judge, cases and facts and things do not get better and do not get more clear when you put them off. Sometimes you just have to sit there and realize, okay, there's this side and there's that side. We have to look at them, we gotta move forward and make a decision. Putting them off never makes them better, never makes them easier. The only thing it ever does is just prolong the agony, and in some instances, even cloud the issues.
Well, we'll find out tonight if that's the case.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Candy, do you have something to say?
Just to check with you, the lights that indicate the time frame when the yellow goes off. How would you like me to, if I notice it, to grab your
Throw a
attention
pencil at me.
without
I'm serious.
being rude to
No,
the
no.
speaker?
Well-
And when you're listening intently, I'm kind of like,
There-
so I just wanted to ask.
It can be obvious, because you're right, it's easy to get lost in the conversation and miss that light change. And so, plus this eye doesn't work as good as this eye, and that's where it is. So, just literally nudge me.
Okay. I just
say-
thought
just whisper, Mr. Mayor, and point to the lights.
Okay.
No problem. In fact, appreciate it.
I just want to be respectful to everybody.
Don't worry about me.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor.
Steve?
Yeah, I already apologized to Carter but I want to let everybody know that when I made the statements about the texting and driving, that it's probably something that I should have just visited with Carter on a one-on-one rather than blabbing it to the whole world. So I want to apologize to everybody for that, and that won't happen again. So, yeah, that was a screw up on my part. That was in Supervision 101.
Yeah, and I think for me, I was, I kept, much like Mike was saying, I thought we were moving toward a decision, and that's why I continued to work on the issues, because we had two of them that got tabled. And both of them seemed to be moving forward. Although if I'd known earlier that we were never gonna get there, I would have called for a motion to table earlier, but it's hard to predict these things. But it was torturous for everybody, so we'll try to avoid that again. I know that, you know, as far as this moderating the speech and comments, part of my job is to make sure we do follow Robert's Rules of Order. And as I said, about 9:30, I just sort of gave up, and people were pretty much talking to each other without even, you know, requesting time to speak. But there are some rules about how often you can speak or comment on the same subject. And we had that rule broken repeatedly last Tuesday. And so I think we'll probably need to get a refresher on that. And Mr. Henley, I think, is doing some research on that right now. You don't need to speak now, John, unless you know. But if you find what we're looking for, I think it would be good for us to just get a little refresher on, you know, how are we supposed to handle these contentious matters, and how do we make sure that everyone gets to speak without having conversation dominated by some number of people repeated comments, because we need to have a debate, of course, but we also need to make sure that we are sharing the time and moving forward. So, but it was a tough one. So anything else we learned from that? I guess the other thing I would say is, and this was a failure on my part last week, is we did take time to plan the agenda for the work session 2 weeks from tonight. We did not take time to look at the agenda for the upcoming council meeting, and we need to do that as well. I think if we'd all looked at that, we might have said, you know, this might be a problem to try to do all of this in one night. And we've done that before, and then we've deferred items. And so I think we need to be a little more careful about that, because it's hindsight's 20/20, but when I look at it now, I say, well, the ingredients were all there for what happened, because we knew that there was going to be public comment, and there was going to be some differences of opinion, and it just took way too long. So we'll try to learn from that. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, if you'd like me to address
Please.
that. Mr. Mayor, Council, in response to the Mayor's question that was posed to me just a few minutes ago, we talked about, well, there are limits that we have in our own rules as well as in Robert's Rules of Order about the number of times that a council person or a member of an assembly can speak to a particular question. And that is 2, so you can speak twice to that particular question. That doesn't mean just on one ordinance you only speak twice. An amendment comes up, you speak twice on that. But you speak once. Everyone else in the assembly has the right to speak before you get to speak again. And then you speak again, and then that is it. You have to vote to suspend the rules for some particular reason. Along with that, one of the exceptions, though, is asking a question or making a brief suggestion is not counted as speaking. So you're actually addressing the substance of some matter, and that would be considered one of your opportunities to speak. And this has been around on our rules as well as the Robert's Rules for a long time, but the last council decided they did not want to follow that. And that was just the rule of the day for them, is that they're not going to follow that. They like to have the debate, and it's really up to you and to the mayor as to how you want to handle that. But those are the rules. If you want to follow them or if you want to modify them, you can do that as well.
Questions for John? So and you guys know, my style would never be to say, you don't get to talk because you already talked twice. But I think we gotta, I'm just gonna ask you all to kind of police yourselves and recognize that's how it's typically done. And to try to make sure that when you take your turn to speak, you say what you need to say and feel like you're more or less done. And then at some point, we just need to move forward, as Mike says, and take a vote. So we do have some unfinished business. I guess we better get started. So the next item on the agenda is this came up. The Bishop House offered a tour, I think to Carter primarily, and then it was copied to me, but way too late before I could go. And so they are interested in having council look at the Bishop House. We have done this sort of thing typically with our facilities rather than facilities run by a nonprofit. So this is just an invitation. If we did do this, one way we could do it would be to ask them to be ready to provide tours maybe between 4 and 4:30, and whichever members of council showed up. It wouldn't actually be part of our work session agenda. Or if you wanted to, we could actually build it into a work session agenda as we did with the event center tour. So, or just drop it entirely. So, any interest in learning more about the Bishop House?
I wouldn't mind. I've always been intrigued by it. Not so much that I've ever gone to any of their functions, but
It's an interesting place. Got some historic significance, so it's kind of fun if you want to.
Well, and I mean, they came to us with a request to help them build a museum, but we didn't go along with that because there wasn't much traction not on the fundraising end yet. So I'm sure that they'd like for council to know more about what they do for possible requests in the future.
you know, I'd like the idea of just, you know, pick a time at 4 o'clock before one of these sessions. Anybody wants to go, go. If you don't,
Is that okay with everyone? 2 weeks from today? Does that work? Think that'll work, Mr. City Manager?
Absolutely.
You guys be willing to contact them and tell them they may or may not have some council members? Well, I think they'll have at least one. So,
Make it happen.
I'll probably forget.
I'll try. I'll try to build it into my schedule. Okay. All right.
Google Calendar.
Well, you want to tee this up, Mr.
You over us.
City Manager? And I see Brooke and Renee are here, so good to have you guys.
Thank you for having us.
And we're going to learn a little bit about Visit Casper and its economic impact. Is that what we're talking about?
Yes, but I come bearing gifts, and I want you guys to know how hard your staff works for you. I was getting texts and emails from Flora and Liz, like, where are you? Are you coming? I was like, I was down at 5:55, Liz. Councilman Kathy, welcome back. Congratulations. We have not met, but I would love to. Hi, Ken. How are you? Good to see you.
Thank you.
Cool.
All right, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you
How are
very
you?
much. Good, thank
I think, Mayor, you have one of these, but
Okay.
you are welcome to.
I do
I
have
think you do. Okay. Councilman, how are you? Great to see you.
They're worth less than $250. Thank you.
They're way less than $250. If I'm breaking the law here, the attorney's in the room and hopefully he'll share it. Okay, so actually some of you were at our National Travel and Tourism Week presentation, and this was one of the gifts that we gave everybody in the room just to celebrate Casper and tourism. Mayor was there, which we really appreciate. So I want to just take a few minutes. Renee Penton-Jones is in the room. She's been our board chair for the last several years.
Hello.
And now she is our treasurer. Thank you. I didn't use those. But anyways, she wanted to be here because really at the end we do have an ask, so I know it wasn't in the memo that you were able to review. It's a very simple ask, but we want to figure out a better way to work with the city on projects and drive things forward. So we're here just to give you a general update on tourism just for a few minutes. We're going to talk about some of our priorities and then just make the request of how do we work well together. Sound okay? So I can tell you now that I sit in your chair on the commission side, I know how important it is to stay on time. So if somebody's the watch keeper or the timekeeper, please let me know because I want to be sensitive to that. Fair enough? Okay. So usually usually we just come guns a-blazing, like, here's what's going on in tourism, let me tell you a great story. But I think this year we took the approach of how do we talk about, or how do we address some of the myths of tourism in Natrona County?
That's for sure.
Is tourism really a legitimate thing in our county? So we hear a lot from stakeholders, people in the community, when we obviously go and travel, tourism's not really a thing in Casper. Like, you've gotta be kidding me, right? Who comes here, why do they come? So I just wanna spend a minute or two talking about this and kinda share with you what we've learned in the last year. So in 2018, 852,000 people visited Natrona County, okay? I'm gonna be really transparent with you, and the press is in the room, so I always hate to be honest in front of the media. We were down maybe 20,000 visitors from 2017. Anybody can guess why?
Eclipse.
The eclipse, right. So we were probably pretty static going into 2018. As Renee can attest, 2019 has been a tremendous year for our lodging properties. So our occupancy right now is running between 85 and 90% market-wide. Is rate holding, or are we up a little bit on rate as well?
Rate is growing.
Yeah, so we're having a very, very strong 2019 in the lodging sector. I know that's gonna show up in your sales tax, because it's showing up in our lodging tax collections too. So Great Brook, 852,000 people come. Where do they come from, right? So last year, we were fortunate enough to be able to do a study with Young Strategies so we could figure out more about our visitors. Where do they come from? How much do they spend? What are they interested in while they're here? So this is a heat map of where our visitors come from all over the United States. What I love about this is I'll never forget when the researcher said, and I'm sorry, Liz, I'm right in front of you. I'll never forget the researcher said, you are an anomaly destination for your size and where you are in the United States. This is incredible. Can anybody guess why our map looks like this? Why does a percentage of our leisure population come through Casper?
Yellowstone Park.
Yellowstone, right? So 28% of our leisure visitors are on their way to Yellowstone, or they're on their way to Teton National Park. So when somebody says tourism is not legit, I promise you, if for no other reason than we're on the way to Yellowstone, it is, but we're gonna talk a little bit about why they come. Fair enough? Okay. So why do they come? If we know it's 28% is Yellowstone and Teton, they also come for relaxation, which is no surprise because generally people take vacations for leisure. They also come for hunting and fishing. Anybody surprised? Yeah, we weren't surprised by that. And then also visiting friends and family. So there's this whole other category of other that's lumped in there, but there are, you know, those are our top 5 reasons why people spend time in our destination. So how long do they stay? Well, the average, if you look at the true average, it was just over 3 days, but the typical response was 2. So what that tells us is there were some travel parties that stayed maybe 7 days or 10 days that skewed the average. So we'll just say for the sake of this conversation, they stayed 2 nights. Well, then how much do they spend while they're here? So this is our leisure segment only, leisure overnight. And this is why our office spends a tremendous amount of time marketing Casper to overnight visitors, because on average, their party will spend $716 during their trip here. So compare that to our day trippers, right? So we know a lot of people from the state of Wyoming will come to Casper for the day and then turn around and leave. It's less than half. So they spend less than half of what our overnight visitors do, and that's why we're so focused from an economic impact perspective on our overnight visitors. What do they think, right? So do they like us? Do they think we do a good job? Well, this is a scary question to ask, I just want you to know, because you never know if they're gonna come out blasting you for something. Our overnight leisure visitors rate us tremendously high. So we score 4.41 on a 5-point scale. So that decreases a little bit in the meeting segment, and it decreases, I think, in our youth sports segment by like 0.02, so it's very minimal, but they rate us really high, so it tells me from a service perspective, from a mobility or transportation perspective, they're getting here and doing what they need to do. Is there room for growth? Yes, but we also do our CTA program, which many of you have heard about. Tim, I know you're really familiar with that. The training program for our frontline workers that we implemented a few years ago, and that program's also making a difference, and we're gonna continue to do that. Okay, so let's talk about another myth. I love what you do, Brooke. I think it's great, but visitors are going to come anyway. People are always going to come to Yellowstone. They're always going to do it. So why is it important to have Visit Casper, and why does what you do matter to our community? For those of you who don't know, tourism is a very competitive business. So there are over 450 organizations like ours in the United States alone. They range from a $500,000 budget to, I was just in St. Louis, and San Diego has a $38 million budget. That's 3 times what the Wyoming Office of Tourism spends to attract visitors to San Diego. If we don't do it, I promise you somebody else is gonna spend the money to bring them here. So it's hugely competitive because it's new money into an economy, right? So our money is brown money where we just continue to circulate and we live here and we pay our bills here, but it's all new money and they understand the value of that. So one of the reasons we do it is because it's competitive, we need to get our share. So how do we do it? Well, we get to sell Casper globally, and I'm just gonna talk briefly about the 3 segments that or the 3 ways that we do this. The first is we have a very aggressive sales effort. So we spend a lot of time in meetings and conventions and a lot of times in the sports segment. So is anybody familiar with that group of women on motorcycles who came in July? Some of you? Oh, Max, okay. Oh, good, thank you. So we had 250 women from all over the United States here on their motorcycles for their national convention. That was a direct result of one of our sales efforts. So they came in, they rode their bikes in the parade, they went to the fair, some of them sang the national anthem. They felt like superstars in our market, and that's one of our selling points. So another one, I know you guys work with the biathlon as well. Ski for Light is 150 visually impaired skiers who are coming in January of 2020 with their mentors and the people who run that event. So we'll see 300 to 400 people in our market for 7 to 10 days in January, right? So that's what we do. We go to these shows and we sell Casper as a destination to drive economic impact. So that's the first. The second is we run really aggressive marketing campaigns. So we're obviously in traditional media, but social and digital media as well. So we see some good results. And then some of you have seen this. For the first time ever, last year we peeled $100,000 out of our marketing budget and said, we're going to pursue a PR effort. So never have we invested in working with a media firm to say, can we drive editorial coverage of our community? So I'm happy to say the return on that's been about 10 to 1. So we've reached over 50 million eyeballs this year with this effort. We've been in publications. We were in Newsweek Japan, if you can believe that. I'm like, please come to Casper. We'd love to take your money. But also American Angler and the Drake magazine. So we're seeing huge wins in that PR space, and we're going to continue that. And actually, we've upped our investment this year for that. So earned media value, just over $1 million. So that's kind of our 3-pronged approach of how we sell Casper globally. I'm going to skip the video. Okay, so last myth, so we can get to some of the other stuff. Tourism doesn't affect me, Brooke. In my everyday job, it doesn't affect me.
He's your poster child.
Is that picture the best picture of Lewis you've ever seen in his whole life? He
sure
does
he'd
not
love being
know
called
that
that.
we have that picture. So Max, keep the camera that way. Okay. So we think about this. In my opinion, tourism impacts everybody. So I think about an accounting firm, and I think about the businesses who are in tourism who have to use the accounting firm to do their books. So if you look at the direct and the trickle-down effect of the money that exchanges hands or changes hands because of tourism, I would be hard-pressed to find somebody who's not impacted by this industry. Okay, it also drives quality of life. So the money that we spend and the things that we're able to create here also create things for residents. So we're not just doing this in a bubble and we're not just saying come, but when we host events or we're able to invest in things where locals participate, we're winning and the residents are winning. I don't know about you, but I don't think we would have 194 restaurants in Casper if we did not have tourism. I certainly know we wouldn't have the number of attractions and hotels and events. So it's driving a better quality of life for all of us who are here, and we're committed to that. It's what gets us out of bed every day. It's how do we make sure our neighbors have jobs. Those visitors that we talked about at the beginning, those 852,000 visitors, they spend almost $300 million, and that's on everything. Entertainment, recreation, transportation, restaurants. They outspend in our restaurants compared to accommodations, if you can believe that, but it's also accommodations. So it's all their dollars combined are about $300 million. So if you take that out of our economy, what does our business industry look like here? We don't have the same number of retail shops. We don't have the same number of restaurants. So it absolutely impacts us in the local area. You'll enjoy the PD picture right here from the eclipse, right? I don't know if this guy's laughing or crying or thinking, thank God we made it through the eclipse. But anyway, so it does generate some sales tax as well. So the city and state combined, $14.5 million. And that's real jobs at the municipal and the county level. That is fire, that is police. that's our parks being mowed, and I always joke my job here will be done when our side streets, when we have enough money to plow our side streets. Is that soon? I hope so. I'm working really hard. Okay, so collectively, we have over 32,000 households in our county. Every household would have to write a check for almost $450 to make up that sales tax that's being collected at the state and local level. I promise you guys it's impacting all of us. So I think that's my general overarching, oh, one more thing, puts 2,600 people to work. Here's my favorite slide. I can't believe I was gonna just skip past this. So we have a crazy economy, right? We all know this, like we're cyclical, we go up and down, energy is a huge impactor, but if you look at the employment line or the trend line with employment in hospitality jobs in our area, 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, it's been very consistent. It always hovers around 2,500, 2,600 jobs. So it's always a backfill and it's a stable source of employment regardless of what's going on in our economy, and that's important. Okay, our board is also very generous. I think you guys give community promotion money. Every year you allocate those funds, and I know I've talked to the city manager about this too. Our board is always very generous. So last year we gave over $150,000 back to events that drive tourism, things like CNFR, that's a huge investment for us. Proud to host the Best, that does all the state tournaments up at the event center, the Nicolais and Art Museum. So we're able to reinvest that money, and I think there's some opportunities to be more strategic with also how you guys allocate your money, because if we put them together, what can we do? Like, what kind of quantum lead can we create together? How much do you collect, Brooke? Like, how much is the lodging tax, right? We were just on the ballot in November. We passed at the highest rate we've ever passed at. We were at a 77% approval rate, so thank you very much if you voted for the lodging tax. Last year it was just under $1.8 million. Okay, so that's a lot of money. We're really fortunate in a market our size to be able to have that kind of money to spend. It's not the largest year on record. I think 2014 or 2015 was just a little bit higher. The market was on fire then as well. So what do we spend it on? This is a whole, I could stand here for 2 hours and talk to you about this. So if you want more information after your work session, happy to give it to you, but this is a breakdown. So we break it out by department. So it's meetings and conventions, it's sports, we've got PR, we've got our CTA program, we 100% fund the visitor center up at the Trail Center. So happy to share that. I don't want to move too fast, but I know I'm out of time. Derek? Okay. So, several months ago, we've always been in the promotion space. So 30 years ago, the state legislature passed a law or statute that says you can collect, your community, either your county or your municipality, can collect up to 4% on lodging. Okay, so we're 30 years old this year. In that statute, it clearly defines that that money is to be used only for promotion. So never have we been in the infrastructure game, never have we been in the product development game. So this was the first time the board took a real strategic look and said, if we could be in the capital space or the infrastructure space, what would that look like to drive our visitor economy forward? So instead of just running ads and doing PR and promoting what we're given, what would that look like? So we did the survey. The presentation that we had on this, and Tim was in the room, it was 2 hours. I don't get 2 hours with you today, but I did bring my list of what some of the key takeaways were. So Bob, if you don't mind, I'm going to give you a few to pass down, and I'll keep one for myself. And Liz, I'll give you one too, because I know we need to work together on a few things. Thank you. Okay, so this will be no surprise. In our opportunities for our destination, you can see on the top left, I hope no one's shocked when we see meeting and event facilities. It's been a problem we've been trying to solve in our market for well over a decade, right? Some new meeting space. The interesting part is when this survey was in the market was when the Clarion ramped up their investment into remodeling the parkway. So we're yet to see what that investment is going to do or how it will change the landscape, but I certainly think that it will, right? So I just want to be fair on where we were. So accommodations and meeting facilities, I won't go through all of these, but I just want to point out a few. Outdoors activities and tours. So one of the things that we've talked a lot about is we struggle on Sundays and Mondays in our market because a lot of things are closed. Our museums are closed, a lot of attractions are closed. There's just less for people to do. So how do we own that space and say, can we create walking tours or driving tours or GPS enabled, whatever that looks like, or how do we make sure that there's rental equipment down by the river if somebody wants to get on? So that's a discussion that we are having in our office. One of the things that came up is downtown shopping. So if you're a female on here and you think there's enough women shopping, raise your hand, right? So that might be an opportunity for us too. Campgrounds, I can tell you on the county side, is something that's on my mind as a commissioner, is how do we make the campgrounds on the mountain better and more accessible and up to snuff for what our travelers are expecting when they come, or what our campers are expecting. Public Wi-Fi, so one of the things, and Renee can speak to this too, so yes, public Wi-Fi, but also I want to call it last mile, but I know that our hotels, when they're full and somebody's got a phone, a tablet, and a laptop, they can't all be serviced, right? So we
Correct.
Thank you.
We don't have enough broadband.
So it's still a challenge, and we've got to figure out a way to solve it, and it's a priority for us. So how do we do that, right? We have broadband, obviously, it's not enough. Okay. Public transportation, so that's one of the things that you're going to see as one of our top priorities going forward. Cheyenne does a really good job with their trolleys moving people around the city, whether it's conventioneer traffic, whether it's their community. They have figured out a way to make that sustainable over the years that they've been able to offer it. We want to find a solution as well. I think the city hopefully will have a role in that conversation with us. Air access is always unique. If you listen to Glenn talk, the more flights you add out of here, the more likely it is to monopolize the flights from United to from Denver to Casper. So I don't know if there's a good answer, but we're committed, if there is, to helping find it. And then international readiness. So on the right-hand side, two things I just want to point out quickly. We are struggling with workforce. I know that we've worked with your police department in the past on recruitment packages or packets. I know that the sheriff's office is getting ready to launch an initiative to market the destination to attract new deputies. So the county side is on that. We're also doing that out of our office to say, how do we sell the destination and attract workforce there? Okay, so hopefully there's some synergies there. And then we're also looking for sustainable revenue sources. So going to the voters every 4 years is amazing, because when the voters vote for you, like you know that you're free and clear to run for 4 years, but there could come a day where something happens, and it's happened in a lot of destinations. If the lodging tax goes away, so does our ability to market our place. So what are our priorities? We have not talked about this at the council level, and the commission's just starting to hear about this too. Business improvement districts have been in existence in Wyoming for decades, and it's how something like the DDA would be funded. So there's legislation at the state level that allows for business improvement districts. There is not legislation at the state level for what's called a tourism improvement district. So some of you may know, or you may not, last year we ran a bill, the industry ran a bill at the state legislature to try to pass enabling legislation for a tourism improvement district in the state. We don't have that, so there's no conversation at a local level anywhere, but that is something that the industry is focused on. You'll see it come out as a bill again going forward. So just heads up, that's one of our primary priorities, is how can we diversify some of our income streams. I-25 research, so I'm gonna go out on a limb, and this is hard for me to talk about because I don't have a lot of quantifiable data to share or costs, but one of the things we've really been thinking about, I-25 has been a priority for all of us for a long time. Does it impact us? Like, we know what it looks like, we know what some of our challenges are. We're trying to figure out if there's a way to calculate the economic impact of what our I-25 corridor is costing us. So does it cost us in new residents? Does it cost us in business relocation? Does it cost us in our visitor economy? Like, do people not stop because as they drive through they see this? Do they not stay because they feel like maybe our community is this, when really if you just get off the interstate and drive 1 minute, you're gonna have a much different experience? So we're talking with some of the big research firms across the US just to figure out what's possible. Can we calculate that? Because whatever the number is, if it is, does it change our priority, right? Does it, would we say, oh my gosh, this is so much, so big, this number, that we need to shift where our focus is? I don't know, but it's on our mind. Is that fair? Okay. We're gonna figure out transportation. So we wanna figure out a way to move our conventioneers around, and we're committed to running a pilot test next summer between certain key attractions in our hotel community to say, what's the ridership? Does it make sense? Is this sustainable? What does it look like? We've not done that before. So we have access to motor coaches and shuttles and things, so we can rent some things from time to time, but our board is very committed to finding a solution for this, and does this make us a more marketable city? Conference center space, don't need to spend a lot of time there. And then engaging residents. So for 28 and a half years, our organization spent all of our time and resources outside of the area marketing Casper to the world. 18 months ago, we said, why are we ignoring the people who live here? If you love where you live, you're so much more likely to invite people here. And we know visiting friends and family is such a big reason people come. So we feel like there's a real opportunity to turn our residents into ambassadors, or do it to a greater degree and be a lot more mindful in how we do it. So that's what you're gonna see from us going forward. Those are some of our top key priorities. So really why I'm here today is, like, we feel like we have a good relationship with the city. I feel like I can call any of you council members. I feel like I can call Mr. City Manager or Liz or Fleur, and we can have good conversations, but sometimes I feel like maybe tourism is overlooked as a potential partner at a table on a project. So it could be a parking study or development opportunity, or a great example is wayfinding, and we were actually able, when somebody on my team is on that committee, we were able to write a check to the city to help fund the wayfinding. We want to be a part of the solution. So today really is about, we enjoy a great relationship with all of you, but we'd love for it to be more strategic, and we're really open to how we might do that. So with that, I would stand for questions, but I would also, like, what could be a good next step in exploring how we could be more strategic?
Questions for Brooke? Bob?
Not really a question, but a comment for you, Brooke. 5G is coming on your telephone.
Yeah.
And 5G will go a long way towards solving a public Wi-Fi issue. So you guys will probably be asked if you have buildings to stick up the waves. You're gonna get little bitty antennas. And they're really powerful. They're like a factor of 10 of
Happy
the
to
one
help
you
you
get.
out.
I have to say, but to your point, it'd be great to bring all of our hoteliers together and say, this is coming, and we'd love you to put it on the top of your building. Let us help facilitate that in one meeting and not chaos. You know what I mean? Like, I love that you brought that up. Not that you're, I mean, it wouldn't be chaos. It'd be great, but.
So do you need some legislative support to change, to allow more flexibility with the mission to move beyond marketing, Brooke? Or is that something you're already allowed to do if you choose to, like the shuttle and other things?
So in full transparency, there is talk out of Teton County of opening the lodging tax bill or the statute. And it gives, if there's some concern, I think if you open that up as its own bill, it'll be a free-for-all on, it'll then fund things that aren't tourism related. So I think the industry has some concern, Charlie. What I'd really love is a way to figure out how to talk to WHAM about how could we get to a place where WHAM supports the enabling legislation on a tourism improvement district. So we're kind of having those conversations on the WCCA side. I don't know where we are with WHAM. So I think we have to tread really lightly, but yes, I think longer term that lodging tax has to be reallocated or opened up in a way that allows us to do product development and investment, because that's really where our growth now will come, is instead of just you give us something and we'll market it, how do we get in the game of we're going to build this and then market it because it's the right thing for our visitors, right?
Other questions? So the tourism improvement district, would that basically be an additional mill levy for certain businesses?
It's an assessment that the hotel community would have to agree to. So if we were to get enabling legislation this year out of the legislature, we, in Natrona County then, because our lodging tax mirrors the boundaries of the county, we would work with the county to set up a district, and the hoteliers at a certain percentage would have to agree to an assessment that they would collect. So we don't even get to have that conversation right now because there's no legislation in the state that allows it.
And if the majority said yes, then all of the hoteliers would
Yeah.
pay that extra fee.
And you can set criteria where if you have less than 30 rooms or however that looks, we work through that at the district level.
Oh,
Just out of curiosity, what is the mill levy for the DDA folks that are in the district? Do you remember?
you know, I can't give you that number. I know it's always passed overwhelmingly. Do you know this?
16,
How much is it?
16, 1/6.
Mills?
1/16 of a mil, okay. Not a lot of money. Really, right? So, one other question, I know, because I knew you're right, we do have to move on, but all of the amenities that we run as a city, all but the golf course run at a deficit. And we, of course, get criticized for subsidizing these amenities, whether it be the Fort Casper Museum, the Event Center, et cetera. and of course, the argument that's made, that we make, is there's economic activity generated by these amenities. They essentially pay for themselves in terms of sales tax revenue that comes back to the city with visitors and users of these facilities. Is there any hope we could ever quantify that impact and counter those arguments so that people can see that these subsidies actually make good sense?
I think, Mayor, that's a really good question, and I want to go back and figure out how we would do that. I know you've done a year-long study at the Event Center to figure out what the impact is. And it breaks my heart as the person responsible for marketing tourism when I think about the Event Center, and I know you take a beating on it, but I think about out of the 276,000 turnstiles in that building every year, over 30% are from out of county. That building is driving impact to our area, and I feel like it is on the back of the goodwill and the grace of this city, and I think we've got to figure out a way to tell that story in a different way. But I think you're asking a good question about, I think we could look at the assets that you own, specifically for Casper, and say, how can we quantify what the economic impact is of those, because they are benefiting our residents and our business community. I just don't have the numbers direct, but I will dig into that. You're asking good questions.
Mike?
I'd like to follow up on what the mayor just asked you about. And that would be hard, what he asked about would be hard to quantify. What I'm gonna ask about and suggest would be harder, if not impossible, to quantify. Because one of the things that strikes me about the event center, about the ski area, about all these things, is if we did not have those things, for instance, if we did not have the ski area, and if every person in Casper that skis just one more weekend out of the winter went to Steamboat Jackson or wherever, how many thousands of dollars would just quietly leave that we would never know had left? Because it wouldn't be like a big business came and said, oh, we're closing and blah, blah, blah. If we didn't have the event center, how many people would make one more trip to Billings, Denver, Las Vegas, wherever, to see a show or something? If we didn't have these things, how much money would just quietly evaporate out of town? And I think that's something that I would suggest you guys might want to kind of think about. And from time to time, maybe beat the drum about that, guys, this is not just about bringing other people in, but it's about keeping our money here in the community.
You know what, and Councilman, to your point, I think we were just talking about one more weekend. Imagine if the city got to a budget place where they said there is no funding for leisure services at all. So what would that cost us in residents, right? Or what would that cost us in population? And how many people are like, this isn't a place I want to live? Because truthfully, we all just choose to live where we want to live, right? Like there has to be something here that makes this place our place. And I think if you take all that out, what's that? And I think that's you're asking great questions. I don't have an answer for you, but I'd like,
well, if you did, I was going to really be impressed.
Okay, well, I've only had a minute and a half in front of you, so I'll see what I can do the next time I see you.
Yeah.
But I do want to come back, and I'm really pleased. I was going to thank Councilman Johnson for his service, or Vice Mayor Johnson on our board. We're very excited to welcome Councilman Friel. I think it's going to be a great relationship. But I don't know how to move forward in a better way with you, but I'm here saying our hand, like, we want to do this with you. Please do this with us, and please can we get a seat at the table?
Well, I can't speak for everyone, but I'm sure that everyone is thinking right now that what you do is critical to our community, and of course we want to involve ourselves in the strategic plan, whether it be developing a trolley system or whatever the specific steps are. I guess if the Visit Casper board develops a strategic plan and says these are the 3 things we want to accomplish over the next several years, that's something council would certainly be interested in, and if it included, and this is the public support that would be required to make it happen, then it would weave right into our budget planning process, and of course, as you point out, it would all depend on where we sit with our revenue picture, but city government clearly has a role to play in making these things happen for all the obvious reasons. So.
And in fairness, so does the county, and so do we. Fair. Okay, thank you. Thanks for your time.
Any other comments or questions before Brick and Renee take off? Thank you guys for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Pretty impressive.
Thank you. Mayor, thanks for always being a fan.
Okay. Okay, we've got a longer span of time here set aside to talk about businesses affecting public health, which was one of our challenging discussions last Tuesday about the tattoo parlors, and we all got some information in our packet about that as far as the city's role and responsibility. Mr. City Manager, you want to get us started on this, please?
You bet, absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Just to remind the group, the impetus behind this ordinance revision, this proposal, if you will, is really simple. The original impetus, that was really to evaluate ways in which the city could streamline its regulatory interactions with mobile food vendors. And upon kind of going through that introspection, if you will, it was determined that this section required the city to do an additional health inspection, if you will, over and above what it is that the county health department, the state, and so forth require. So the initial change was really to remove their types of business, if you will, from the language of the ordinance. In reviewing the ordinance, however, and in particular in talking with the health department on a more acute basis, we determined that there were a number of businesses that A, no longer existed and weren't appropriate to have any kind of evaluation by the city for, and B, businesses that did exist, that do affect public health, and that should be included in the list, that for whatever reason over the years hadn't been brought into the mix. And in your memo you see what some of those could include. So the question that I think still exists for this group is whether or not these changes make sense, and if they do, whether or not the language that we've tried to capture in the ordinance is adequate to support the changes that we're proposing. And that's the direction we're looking for, and of course I think may have been what led to the tabling motion to occur on Tuesday.
Questions, comments? Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When I look through this, I think we're probably headed the right direction, but the meat of it seems to be in section 50440. We've got a list of the folks that are going to be required to have a license. And I think we need to try and make that as straightforward as we can. And I think we're headed the right direction.
Kristen?
And so I think where my confusion just came up, and in hindsight I might have just been confused, but I know when we were talking about some of this, and I know that this is a separated issue, but this is what it stemmed from, with the food trucks, was that they were subject to inspections to basically current code every single year because it was an annual inspection type of period. Because of the way that the wording is so similar as far as like annual licensing and things like that, I just didn't know if we were doing the same thing to here. So I don't think that I made that quite as clear last week, but I guess I just don't want us to see us do that again because I feel like we're in the process of making that more transparent and clear and clean on the mobile vendor side. I just don't want to dig us right back in.
Comment on the business of annual inspections? Carter, is that the clarification that we need?
Sure, Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman. The effort really is aimed at making sure we have the appropriate safety net in place with regard to businesses that affect public health. And it indeed is important that for those kinds of businesses that the city be involved. And I would suggest, as I did in the meeting Tuesday night, that indeed those businesses need to have a separate review from what the county does, because indeed there are different objectives that each organization would have. We don't inspect for health, so to speak, as the county would, and the county doesn't inspect for the things that we look for from a public safety standpoint. So I want to be clear, and forgive me if I didn't make it really clear the last time we talked about this, but the aim is not to try to burden any business, much less mobile food vendors, with numerous inspections that would require numerous permits. However, I do think it's appropriate and important, which is why we're recommending some of these changes, that there are businesses that we want to be sure get inspected at least once a year. And that's why you see the list that you do. But it was not our intent to try to be in there multiple times and assessing multiple permits. And I think that the speaker, I believe her name was Ms. Juarez, made a good point. And I think her case is very representative of what we're trying not to do, and that is be in her place, you know, checking out her operation numerous times, because that's not our intent.
So Carter, if we could, I think what might help is for maybe you to talk a little bit about some of the risks that the public would be exposed to if we didn't do this. Because as you say, there are other inspections that are taking place to mitigate the risks of infection, et cetera, which are not the things we do.
Right.
So what risks are we trying to reduce for the general public with this inspection process?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, keep in mind that with regard to this ordinance and with regard to the businesses that this ordinance is kind of directed toward, are businesses that that indeed have a high propensity to create a health and safety problem. Restaurants are included in this, hotels that feed and provide drink for people, certainly businesses that alter the body and do things of that nature. Our opinion is that getting into that business at least once a year with the perspective that we bring and offer is appropriate. To get really to the heart of your question, Mr. Mayor, I'd love to have Chief Solberg talk a little bit more about why it's important that his folks get in there once a year. And if it pleases the council, we could certainly turn to Ms. Becker as well for the reviews that they coordinate.
Mayor, Councilman, City Manager stated it's important for us as a fire department for the fire code and the life safety code to be able to get in and check really every operating business within Casper to make sure exits, any of the obvious things are you know, up to the current code. Now again, I think some of the misconception is just because we go in yearly, we impose new codes on it. That is incorrect. We only adopt a code here and at the state level every 3 years. So essentially we are looking at the business. Now certainly as time goes on, depending on what that business is, and I believe we reflected in the memo, there are times where we will go 2 years, if not 3 years, if it's a low office environment where there's very low hazard. But certainly restaurants, beauty salons, chemical manufacturers, things like that will definitely want to get in there on an annual basis and be able to check those kind of things and make sure they are in code compliance. We also have a mail out, which is called the compliance engine for suppression systems, so they can take that to their vendor who does the annual checks on those suppression systems and be able to mail that back into us. So again, we're trying to make it as convenient as we can for the business owners and operators, yet want to make sure that there aren't any violations that can be easily corrected at the time of the inspection. So That's really the intent of why, from the fire and life safety perspective. Now, again, the health, they're gonna look at a whole set of other issues when they go in, but from our perspective, it's the obvious fire and life safety hazards.
I've got a question for the chief. A question for you, Chief. When we had the gentleman come in last week and he was talking about the gas inspection for his food truck, I was a little taken aback that every appliance did not have its own stopcock for the gas, and he talked like he had to literally move it out from the wall, which is not uncommon. But you're really testing the distribution system, and it sounded to me like if it has a stopcock, you just test the system. And it wouldn't take removing and taking stuff out of the way. Maybe I misinterpreted how some of these things are built, but.
Well, again, for clarification, are you talking about the mobile vendors?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and again, that did kind of surprise me as well, because typically, again, the way those are, and I guess it depends on whether it's homemade or it's manufactured by somebody as well, how it's actually put in there. But that's all the more reason to have it inspected yearly, not only because it is a moving vehicle, but if it is homemade, and people are moving things around, certainly there's a chance for leaks to develop, and that's what we want to make sure that's prevented. Now, in the fixed brick and mortar restaurants, there shouldn't be things moved. That's done by codes administration when it's initially built, and then certainly we would go in if there's any complaints of odors of gas or any of those kind of things.
Thank you.
Which is why we do annual for these businesses.
Bricks and mortar, absolutely.
So, for example, Chief, we might inspect an operation, and then after that last inspection, somebody might pile a bunch of boxes in front of an emergency exit. And you guys could come in and say, you gotta move those boxes.
Mayor, correct, and really our inspection is good for as long as we're there, because as you said, just as soon as we walk out, if somebody wanted to be malicious or do just something that's inappropriate, we do get calls from the public or even employees saying, is this appropriate? And we can go back in and correct it as quickly as possible, so we don't have a negative outcome.
Any other questions for the Chief, Mike?
Well, no, not for the chief, but I have a different question. I'm sitting here looking at this, and I'm wondering why we want to get out of the business of laundry, dry cleaning, and massage parlors. And why we, a lot of these other things, public showers, amusements. I can see why, some of those are kind of arcane and not around that much anymore, but, and/or I wonder if we might want to be inspecting, places like the fitness centers, that, and locker rooms and things in those areas.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Huber, most of the changes that you have seen from a deductive standpoint, where we've removed businesses from the body of the ordinance, is mostly because the statutory obligations no longer exist for the same kind of inspection. And so what we've tried to do is align the city's requirements with regard to the state's requirements. Now, it's certainly true, in my opinion, that if the city wanted to be more stringent, indeed that could be the case, and you all certainly would have that capacity. But beyond that, Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to defer to Mr. Henley if there are other things that might be missing there.
No, Mayor, Councilman, I think that's really it. In talking with the Turner County City Health Department, they just said, hey, look, we've looked at your ordinance and we have our state marching orders, and we wouldn't have the capacity to, we wouldn't know how to go in and inspect a number of these things. It could be a septic system, we have that in our ordinance, so we don't know how to do that. We don't have anybody to do that. A laundry facility, a dry cleaning facility, we wouldn't even know how to go about doing that. We certainly don't have the staff to do that. So when you say that, these are businesses that affect public health, certainly don't be coming to us to look for some type of inspection, because we just don't have the personnel. We're not obligated by the state to have those people on board.
So if I understand that correctly, we're kind of saying that, number one, it's not in the state statute mandated by the state, but number two, and perhaps even more compellingly, how do you inspect a laundry? How do you inspect these other things? Is that what you guys are really saying? There are no criteria to follow, no international laundromat standards. Maybe we need to do that.
Yeah, Mayor and Council, basically, that was, the information the health department gave us. Certainly, we're looking to see if there is some type of standard for dry cleaning establishments or something like that.
Okay.
But that was.
Well, that answers my concern about those.
Some other questions? So does this go back on our agenda for next week then? And if so, how comfortable are all of you with our capability or our preparedness to answer the kind of questions that we received from the podium last Tuesday?
I'm gonna go.
Reflecting on the reasons we tabled, do we have those answers that we need?
Well, I guess, let me ask a question.
Just don't want to repeat last Tuesday, basically.
Right. I think some of my hang up last week was, we have these inspections that take place, and you look at the food trucks themselves. It's because they move around, and so they're going to be, you have a more probability, I guess, of gas lines potentially having leaks to them and things like that. But then somebody made a comment out there that brick and mortar restaurants pull their appliances out and clean behind them, so the same thing. I mean, essentially you could pinch a line, and so I really don't see where on one side you have more movement of a trailer potentially, and you don't on the other side, but you still have the same potential of there being the same type of a hazard. So to me, it kind of comes down to why are we not treating them all the same? I mean, we're looking at safety of stuff. We just sat here and talked about it. If you go through and do an inspection, and the moment you leave, 2 days later, they go pile boxes up in front of the door. What if we don't go back and do an inspection and nobody says anything for the next 3 years? Well, you got a hazard that's sat there for 3 years. So why we're not treating them all equally? That's the hang up I have with this whole thing. Is should be just treated, if it's safety, should be treated equally across the board, and we should do it same amount of time. I don't know.
Again, and I stand to be corrected, but I believe we are doing every restaurant or any assembly occupancy at least annually on all the brick and mortar. So that is comparable to the inspection of annually for the food vendors. To my knowledge, again, I'm not in the restaurant business, but I've inspected many restaurants over my career. I don't know of items being pulled back and forth that were described that night. Now, maybe there's a new industry or way to do that, but I'm not sure. And again, typically what happens is the gas, once the building is brought in or a kitchen's added, all those pressure tests are done, similar to your house, and things aren't moved around as compared to mobile vendors that are moved around or could be built by homemade in your backyard. Is why the code wants it pressure tested at least annually. So there is a big difference between the brick and mortar and what happens in the mobile vendors as far as the pressure testing of the gas lines. And again, I stand to be corrected if restaurants are pulling things in and out. I'm not familiar with that.
And I think the comment that was made was that their appliances, when they're cleaning behind them, they're pulling appliances out and cleaning behind them. So you have just as, if you're pulling some of these items out, that maybe have gas lines attached to them, just kind of the way
I'm
I
not familiar with any appliance fed by gas that you would pull out. But I stand to be corrected if somebody in that industry can show me those. But again, I guess my bigger point is they are being inspected every year, and certainly if there are any issues, we are usually contacted on whether it's an odor of gas or anything like that, where mobile vendors are pretty much, they're on their own as they move around and come and go within the city.
So this is a question I should know. Steve, go ahead.
So, a statement you made, you're requiring the mobile food trucks to actually pressure test every year, or are you just doing a visual every year?
No, the adopted code for trucks, and then we extended it to trailers, requires pressure testing through a registered or certified vendor, whether it's an RV vendor or a plumber, once a year. Yes.
Just like when you do make an addition or whatever on a brick and mortar building.
Right.
But the big difference there becomes you aren't requiring the brick and mortar to be tested every year, pressure tested every year. All you're doing is a visual inspection, correct?
We would do a visual inspection along with the hood system or
Right.
the extinguishers or anything like that, correct?
But basically, yeah, you're incurring an $80 to whatever dollar fee on the mobile food vendor for the pressure test, where you're not doing that for the brick and mortar.
And remind me, Chief, how does this affect the vendor coming in from out of town?
Well, again, if we know about it in advance, and that's the whole reason that we want to have the inspection, so we could at least see if they had a pressure test, see if it's homemade, see if it's made by a manufacturer. Some, I guess, evidence of, when they turn this gas on, there's not going to be leaks occurring and ultimately causing a fire. That's our intent. That was the whole connection with us and the health department, is to get those notifications through the gray slip. To do that. We're certainly going to continue to talk with them, even with these modifications, but there could be trucks that come and go that we just can't get to.
Mr. Mayor, if I could. The point that I think Chief Silber made here just now is really critical, because indeed what we're doing is we're trying to consolidate the inspection with the state, with the county, in order to minimize the amount of inspections that a mobile food vendor has to endure, which would include eliminating another permit cost, or inspection cost, I guess you'd say, that historically we have assessed to mobile food vendors. And so if this ordinance passes, the practice that we would incur would be consolidating our inspection with the state, so that indeed those inspections do occur, but they just don't occur at the expense of an additional permit or license or whatever on the part of the city for mobile food vendors.
Cam? I think Kristen and then Steve.
Just really quick for I guess I don't understand, like, why a salon isn't on here, or why we took out, like, aged, no, that's actually a politically correct word, like a senior living facility, because it looks like we've crossed that out. I guess, tattoo artists, they do have, is it state level? State inspections? It's either state or county. And I believe salons do as well, so why are salons not included in this concern?
Carter, you want to take a crack at it?
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman, I might have to defer to the attorney here for this one, but I assume that they were still included.
Yeah, and as I understand it, again, we're talking about businesses affecting public health. And so the health department does in fact look at tattoo artists and cosmetology, whereas it would be the Department of Cosmetology, I guess, for the salons, which is not the health department. So it's a different branch of government.
Okay.
So we were just looking actually at more of those that the Department of Health had inspected for our ordinance addressing businesses that affect public health. So we just thought it was more consistent to go with just what the Department of Health, in fact, did inspect on that basis.
Steve?
I had another question, and I don't know whether this would be for the chief or for the city manager. Is there any place else in the state of Wyoming, either through state, county, municipality, town, yada, 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 that requires that annual gas test?
Of the mobile vendors?
Yes, of the mobile vendors.
Yes, Mayor, council member. Yes, and again, Wyoming is very unique, where the State Fire Marshal's Office adopts the International Fire Code, in this case 2018 version. We're also required to to adopt that code. So, and that's for trucks, vehicles. Now, what we did here in Casper was we extended that to trailers. But yes, to answer your question, the 2018 code, both under City of Casper and the State of Wyoming, does require annual pressure testing of the gas service in mobile vendors' trucks.
So then, my inference is that when he was saying that food trucks aren't willing to come here because of the additional inspections, that starts to become a falsehood, and what it would amount to is other places aren't enforcing that. So that if a food vendor in Douglas that wants to come to Casper, even to work in Douglas, should have had that gas pressure test someplace in the state of Wyoming and have either a plumber's or somebody's, third party's inspection test that says this was done.
Is that a fair question,
If I
Chief?
could, yes. But again, I don't speak on behalf of the State Fire Marshal's office or any other place in Wyoming, really. So, yeah, my assumption is there are vendors that aren't being tested, and I don't know that there's enough people out there to track them down and make them comply with that. So, and the code is very specific as far as having somebody through the Department of Transportation that's recognized to do this type of inspection. So, as far as I know, it is there and is in the adopted codes, but I can't speak to whether people are getting them done in any other jurisdiction, because it is such a new thing. This was, I believe, the first year that they've come out and started addressing food trucks.
We're seen as onerous because we're following the rules.
A follow-up to that,
Essentially.
then if there is an inspection, let's say George comes from wherever and he has a certificate that he has been inspected within the last year, are we going to wind up honoring that inspection, would be my next question then.
Comment on that, Chief?
Yes, and yes, we would.
Okay.
Similar to when we have vendors come in and check the hood systems and certify them and the extinguishing systems. It could be from anybody in the United States that does it, and they'll accept their certification.
As long as
Okay.
they're certified to do it.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor.
I think you were waiting, Mike, and then Bob.
Okay.
You mentioned
Go
DOT.
ahead, Mike.
Well, but,
Oh, I'm sorry.
but maybe I'm the only one that's confused about this. The proposal that's in front of us in essence, talks about removing mobile food vehicles from this ordinance. I'm curious, why are we wasting time talking about all this stuff about mobile food trucks and trailers? Because it's, this, to me, looks like it's taking them out of this ordinance. Maybe I'm confused about that. If I am, set me straight. But-
Either one of you.
Mayor,
Chief?
Take a crack at it, Chief.
thank you. Mayor, Councilman, my understanding was the removal of the mobile food vendors from this ordinance was to get them from no longer having to get the city health license or permit, because they were getting one
Right.
from the county. It had, and my understanding was it had nothing to do with fire codes, inspections, building codes, anything like that. That was my
That's
understanding.
my understanding as well. So I don't know why we're bogged down here once again, talking about mobile food vendors, other than that those guys just seem, frankly, in my opinion, to love to come and bellyache about things.
I just wanted to clarify that we were in fact paying attention to people coming in
Well,
from out of town.
Yeah.
And if and the people, because we were criticized by the people in town for inspecting them, but not paying attention to people coming in from out of town, and that they were essentially getting a free
Yeah.
ride. And
This
I wanna make
proposed
sure that we're
ordinance-
being fair, so.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I agree with what the chief is saying. It sounds like this really is a problem for DOT. They are the guys that deal with mobile equipment, and there is a whole list of things that your truck can be taken out of service for. If your brake linings are not thick enough, if you have lights out, if you have leaks, if you have fuel leaks, truck can be taken out of service for that. And we probably need a little help to try and get DOT to take this little hole in the Department of Transportation on and say, okay, you can go to any DOT office and have your food truck inspected, as you still have to have for your truck, but just make it for a trailer too, because it applies to trailers as well as trucks. So we could use some help there from the state.
Anybody else? Steve?
A comment to Councilman Huber's comment about why we're spending time is in the pre-memo. It actually relates to the fire code portion of the new building code that we adopted. And there were several questions that came up at the meeting the other night about fire code and inspections. And so I think we all, as Mr. Mayor requested, can we all answer the questions when they come up? And that's why I have pursued these questions, to be able to answer those if they come up. But I understand your point as well.
But, and that's, you know, but it's not germane to this, thing. It's, you know, that's all background, that yes, it's issues that need to be addressed, but I've made my point.
Well, of course, anytime we put something on a work session agenda for further discussion, the goal, of course, is to arrive at a product that people are comfortable with, that has purpose, that solves a problem, and that we all understand and can explain to someone. So I don't want to leave this until everyone feels they're there, because it's going to be on our agenda. Well, when did we said to a date certain? Oh no, we said indefinite, didn't we?
No,
Did-
No, I think this one was certain.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Parades was in.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay. And the date certain being?
Move forward.
Actually, the motion to table failed on this one.
Oh.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes, I missed that.
thank you. It was a long
Hard to
day.
keep up with.
Okay. All right, so we're moving forward. So we passed on first reading that. And now, so everyone is comfortable with the language as it was presented for us to go to second reading without any changes. Okay? Is that, are we all there? Okay. All right. Thank you, Chief.
You bet,
Thank
you
you,
bet.
John. Okay, I guess we can move on then to Code of Ethics and Social Media. Mr. City Manager, could you get us started with that,
Oh,
please?
you betcha, you betcha. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As council may recall, albeit this was in a technically previous council, much of the ordinances relating to the Code of Ethics were removed with respect to amendment actions that took place previously. This council has suggested that this discussion needs to be had again to talk about guidelines that direct ethical behavior, if you will, that would be captured and memorialized in the body of our ordinances. And the city attorney has done a great work putting together a number of those guidelines that could potentially be considered for your body of ordinances. Furthermore, there's been conversation as well pertaining to the appropriate use of social media. And many of you have correctly identified that there's a lot of wedding, if you will, potentially between ethical guidelines and policies, and particularly as it relates to individuals representing themselves or the council in social media, which, as you all know, is becoming a very large public forum. So, again, the city attorney put together a couple of suggestions for you to consider, and our request is that you look this over, give us your thoughts, changes you'd like to see in the language, and pursuant to that potential direction, we would prepare it for formal consideration on the floor.
Well, it's a pretty meaty document. And so, there's no urgency. We've been operating without a code for some time. But this time is set aside for having, I guess probably an initial discussion on what code, whether we need a code and what it should look like. So I think we can just kind of have a free-ranging discussion. Let's leave the social media out of the picture for now, because that will be a whole nother discussion, even though it is related. I guess I'll just take comments or questions about the language that Mr. Henley gave us in his proposed code.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I'll start out. First off, I think that we do need a code. I think it's very important that we do. As a legislative, as a governing body, I think that one of our ultimate functions is we do have the, I think, inherent power and should have it codified that we have the power to, in essence, sit in judgment of our fellow members. Much like the legislative bodies do, you know, if a member of the legislature screws up, the legislature can expel them and do things like that. I think we really, you know, we really do need ultimately some authority like that, and that it should be codified, number one. But also I think it's really important that these things are in here so that it serves as a guideline, and so that it's not, you know, when somebody says, oh geez, I did this, I didn't know it was a problem, it didn't seem to me like a problem. But you got something, you know, some concrete guidance to look at.
Hopefully before someone does something.
Yeah, so that you can, you know, because really the idea is to help people avoid problems. I think that, you know, the presumption always has to be that people are not going to get into these kind of positions as a councilman or whatever with a sinister intent so that, oh, I can go out and do some bad things. And if they are, well, there are other bigger problems. I will go beyond that, and I will comment on this, that, you know, everybody loves to beat up on lawyers in the legal profession. You know, I have seen, you know, with the previous council, with, you know, with Craig Hedquist, if he had tried to pull the things that he did, he would have been disbarred so fast that his head wouldn't even have had time to start to spin. You know, just, and I think that we really need to be in a place where we can, you know, where we can deal with those kind of extreme kind of things, where somebody's, well, I don't think I need to go on about that. I think that's really important that we have something like this. I will tell you that former Councilman Laird just admonished me at absolute length. Do not delve into this. Do not delve into this. You're just going to do nothing but cause big problems for the city in the future with litigation and all that. But beyond that, I think that the language that Mr. Henley came up with here is a really, really good starting point. I think there are some, you know, relatively minor tweaks that I can see that we can do to this, but I'm ready to move forward on this.
Me too.
Other comments, concerns, questions? It's kind of a big deal. If we move forward with this, whatever language we adopt, and we learned this before, the future councils will inherit. And so I think we need to be thoughtful and thorough, and not in any way questioning the language that Mr. Henley provided to us. But I do think this is fairly serious business, and that we do it in a way that everyone is comfortable with. This is something where we really need to have not just a majority, but a true consensus. So I don't want to put anyone under undue pressure to, you know, get behind this without feeling fully comfortable and having all their questions answered, or maybe even needing more time to consider. So, Ken?
I asked just that, more time to consider and read through it more in depth. I mean, we got it Friday. I know I spent some time Saturday and Sunday on it, but I would personally like more time to go through it and make sure that it's the language that we have, and if we have questions we can email or talk about it another time, because as you're saying, as Councilman Mike brought up, you know, the Hedquist thing was huge for you guys that was on here at that time. A lot of people disagreed with how it went down, and a lot of people agreed. We need to make sure that our code and ethics are gonna be set for us in the prior correctly.
Well, one of the criticisms that the code received, and put that whole scenario aside, one of the criticisms that the code received was that it could be used as a weapon, and that 5 members could get together and somehow sanction someone that they just didn't like, or they disagreed with their voting history, and they would basically use the code as a hammer to punish them for disagreeing or behaving in a way that this 5-person majority didn't like. And so we want to be sure that this code doesn't really give people that opportunity.
Right.
And that we hold ourselves to a very high standard, not only in terms of what does the code require, but what does it require of any group that wants to, that believes some violations have taken place, so that it isn't an easy matter to criticize or even sanction a fellow council member. Steve?
Mr. Mayor, I appreciate your comments here, because not having that particular background of why it was repealed, I appreciate that. And I would probably like to go along with Councilman Bates that I would love to, now knowing that background and history, go back through this at least another time, if not more, to look at it a little bit more before we would bring it up to the floor for a vote.
Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You know, having worked under a system where we did have a code of ethics and not having it, I think we do a disservice to our people in the city by not having a code of ethics. And the fact that we are asking to move forward with a code of ethics, I think it's going to come up more than once over the next few weeks or few months. And so I think we've got a pretty good scald on where we need to go right now, and I thank John for all of his work. So I'd like to go ahead and proceed. There is time built into the system in order to do this.
Well, and again, as I said earlier, I think this is a decision before us that maybe is a little bit different, where rather than just saying, do we have 5 thumbs up and okay to proceed, I really do believe that we should try to make sure that we have everyone's thumb up before we proceed. And if that takes a little more time, I think it's important enough that we take that time. And we have 2 members who aren't even here this evening. So, I mean, if people feel strongly that we should move forward, I guess I'll hear that, but I want to be sure that we're being respectful to everyone and making sure that everyone is, that people aren't doing this, but doing this. That there's a very firm support from everyone, because they understand what the language is and it's been altered as needed. So I think I would respectfully suggest that we not push too hard to move forward until we get there. Mike?
Mr. Mayor, realizing that I probably talked more than twice.
It's not a formal meeting, so you're not under that
I
obligation.
will be the main offender in that regard. But I really absolutely agree with what you're saying. I think that in this kind of an issue, we really need to have, you know, maybe we might never get a total agreement on something, but I think we really do need to have, you know, really strongly everybody on board. We set aside 40 minutes for this tonight. I'm not hearing a lot of real in-depth wordsmithing or anything like that. I wonder if it would be workable to just put this on to the work session agenda for 2 weeks from today, setting maybe like 10 minutes or so for it, and then see if everybody's had a better chance to digest it before then. You know, I agree that I think we need to move forward with this, but I don't want this to be rushed, because this is something that needs to have a lot of careful thought to it.
Well, you mentioned that you were reached out, that your former crony reached out to you and gave you some unsolicited advice. I suspect, since this is now before us, we will receive maybe more feedback from our constituents who maybe haven't had a chance to look at this yet, and more comment on, as Ken said, the pros and cons of adopting this or the language. And so sometimes it's helpful to bring it forward and then see what kind of feedback and comments people have, because this is about a set of standards that we are holding ourselves to for our constituents, and so that they can have some confidence that this body is operating in an appropriate manner. So I guess I would just ask Mr. Henley one question, and it's fine if you just want to say no to this, but was there, as you worked on this, John, was there some language that you really struggled with, where you had to make a choice, where you were at a choice point and you had to say, I don't know if I want to say it this way or that way, I guess I'll land on this, or any contentious moments that you had in drafting this that you might share with us, so that we can see the dilemma that you faced in trying to create a code? Or was it pretty clean for you and straightforward from the get-go?
Thank you, Mayor. The one area where we've expanded a little bit, and basically it's just because of the social contract that we have with each other, is that in the past, nepotism was limited to just family relationships, relationships. Here, because you may have a supervisor who's working for the city as a director or some type of a manager, but also may have someone who is or she's cohabitating with. I've included that in as part of the nepotism provision. So I would like for you to think about that, because that is a little bit of a stretch outside the norms, I think, of some of the past things that the council and the state has done. Other than that, I think that the language, I certainly tried to base it upon a lot of the state statutes and things of that nature. But that was the one area where I put it in the memo because I wanted you to be aware of it, but I also would appreciate the opportunity to bring it to your attention.
And I do have one question about maybe a potential issue to address, and is you talk about the use of title prestige of public office, and then underneath that it's for personal gain. One of the things council members have had to understand is the proper role of the council members with respect to city employees. That we do not have, because of our position, the authority to give direction or criticism of our city employees as far as how they're performing their duties. And I wonder if there shouldn't be some kind of clause in there where we make it clear that that kind of, so for example, if we had a rogue council member who was going around and giving staff members direction and saying, I'm a city council member and I want you to do your job this way, and the direction is different than what they're getting from their direct supervisor. Should that be somehow included in the code of ethics and saying that behavior is inappropriate?
I think it's a good thing to be thinking about, because I think, one, you're putting yourselves at risk if you do that, because you could end up in some type of a lawsuit that would be beyond the scope of your authority. We have 3 employees, and you don't have all of the city employees as your employees. So if you were to in fact somehow interfere with their contract, try to take over the position of the city manager or their direct supervisor, and they would resign, saying I was forced to resign because of this criticism or action of this council member, you may have no insurance coverage through war. I've seen some of the language and some of their presentations saying you have to be very careful with that as a council member. So it's not a bad idea, just, again, it's another reminder.
Because again, the real purpose of it is education and guidance, not sanction. I don't know what, most of you feel, any reaction to my suggestion, or Herder, do you have something to say?
Another point different from that.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I agree with what you just said. But it kind of brings into focus another area of question for me, that, you know, one of the things that I think is really important always for whenever anybody sits as part of a board, none of us have, unless we're designated by the council, for instance, if they were to say, well, you know, Councilman Frio, you go, in essence, be the police commissioner or something, and we grant special powers to that position or something. Unless there's been some kind of a council action like that, none of us acting individually have any real power in the city. The only power that we have is to come together as part of the council and to vote. Well, the reason that I bring this up is that I wonder if there would be some value in having, in essence, a handbook or something that, a preamble to some of this or something that might emphasize those things, especially to new members of the council. And I think that there are, this proposed ordinance affects not only, it affects members of the council, but it also affects employees. But specifically speaking with reference to members of the council, that there might be some value in saying, well, okay, here are some examples of some unique problems that may potentially confront council members, and here are some things that you can and can't do, or here are some ways that you can handle that. I don't know how you draft something that passes legal muster, but yet is still sufficiently informative to be helpful with people on that, because it's a lot more than just go forth and do good. Because we got to presume that everybody, and I'd like to see some language in this that starts out with a preamble that says, we presume that all city employees and members of the council are going to act in an ethical and proper manner. This is intended to assist them in that regard and to provide some teeth if they don't. But that's just another little thought that I had, is that
And you do cover some of that in the orientation, right, Carter?
Yes, sir.
I think, sorry, Steve.
Along those things that Councilman Huber was talking about, I noticed that it didn't say specifically on the boards and whatever that we were supposed to go to, but I remember from past times, that particular sheet that had those all listed, it actually said whether you were a voting member of that board or just a liaison to that board. And so I think those types of things, if we would bring that back up, would help out a little bit of what Councilman Huber was talking about. Because I noticed that when I read through what Councilman Walsh had been on and things like that, trying to fill in, that it didn't say what those positions were.
It's always been a little murky as to what, how much independence an individual council member operates with when they serve on the board. One argument would be that you should only vote on that board in a manner that's consistent with the majority of the council, since you are the representative of the council, and not just your personal beliefs. And we've never really tackled that, at least in the time that I've been here. Was your hand up, Ken?
No.
I'm willing to, well, first off, any other reactions to I don't know if that's something that should be in the code or not, to set some guidelines with respect to staying within our actual role. I'm seeing some heads nod. Would you be comfortable drafting some language with that, John? And
Yes, I'd be happy to. And then take another look at it, it'd be great, sure.
And Mr. Mayor, I think that gets back to not only are you a voting member, but you're a liaison to those boards. and you really have to be a communicator of what goes on back and forth. And rather than maybe just giving some of those reports at around the table, it may be that, like, well, Joint Powers Water Board, for example, that will meet next Tuesday. Maybe we should be talking about what might be on that agenda tonight so that the voting members of that board that are here would know what's going on, so that you would get that feel. So
I'm counting on Council McCarthy to handle all of those details.
Well, that's a good point, Steve.
well, if I had been to one of those meetings, I probably would.
I would think of that as more of a procedural matter than, code of ethics. So,
True, but
we gotta move on to the social media policy here, so, any other comments on the code of ethics? It looks like we're just gonna put some time on our work session agenda in 2 weeks now that people have had a chance to wrestle with it a little bit and get some feedback from constituents, et cetera, so.
Yeah, I agree, that's fine, we'll talk about it in 2 weeks, but I think we've gotta keep in mind that we have statutory responsibility as the city council. And it's pretty clear when you look at the statutes that we have, we've got 3 employees. And it would be totally unethical for, in effect, a board of directors to go out on a production floor and try and tell a guy what to do when he's not really his employee. He's a board of directors guy. And I think that's just so obvious. I'm not sure we need to restate that, but we have had occasions where that has in fact occurred. And I think that's where this policy needs to be. And that's why we need to have one. We did have this policy in our council handbooks until we removed it.
And I'm just thinking of the city employees, that's a pretty awkward position to be in, because they might know intellectually, I don't have to do what this person's telling me to do, but they're also saying, but wait, it's a member of the city council telling me.
Well, hopefully it'll get back to our city manager, and I think we would need to have a meeting and come to an understanding.
Well, that would at least give us some language to say, did you remember this clause in here?
Yeah, and the other thing that's statutorily set out is, we talk in the last paragraph about removing somebody from council. And as I recall, we were given a number of legal opinions saying that in the city manager form of government, we're the only one that doesn't have that power. If you're in a commission form of government, you do have that power. And to take that away from, and just say because an oversight on the part of our Constitution, we need to have that. So I'm happy with waiting a couple weeks.
Well, that's something else for people to wrestle with, because that's a big question.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, well, let's defer this, and we'll put it on the agenda for 2 weeks, and let's talk a little bit about social media. So you all had the proposal, and I think there has been some concern about social media and how it should be used. Any reactions to the proposed policy? Kristen?
I mean, obviously this is the one probably for all the city staff, but I mean, I think anything and everything that we would cover is actually in this policy that Carter signed, I don't know, November of 2018. I mean, it's just talking about, like, don't be commenting on legal manners, don't be representing yourself as the city, be respectful of, the city employees, city staff, other people. I mean, that's all it is. It's not like we need to police each other. I mean, I think it's just the sense of, if we're talking about ethics, social media is absolutely relevant nowadays. So, I mean, I think that one's pretty great as is.
Comments? So what is the sense of council? Would we be talking about a resolution to pass that would codify this? What would be the next step when it says direction requested?
Mr. Mayor, that would be exactly what we would be looking for from the council. We think that this could come forward in an ordinance, and you've got a couple options. Councilwoman Luth certainly pointed out more of an expanded version that exists in current employee policy. There's a shorter version as well that might suit better for an ordinance type submission, but that's exactly what we're looking for. What would you like to see? We would recommend probably an ordinance similar to what you would pass with your code of ethics discussion, but we're open for your feedback and direction.
Ordinance would include essentially the language in the proposed policy.
Yes, sir.
Do we want it, are we that comfortable with this at this point, that we would say, go ahead and draft an ordinance? Do you wanna see the ordinance before it comes to the floor and work on it? Or, okay?
Yep.
You're saying yes, and.
Well, Mr. Mayor, the question that I have is if we want to do this by ordinance or if we want to do it by resolution. Carter, could you or John comment on what the advantage or disadvantage either way is there? Because resolutions are sure a lot easier to adopt and they're a lot easier to change or fix if we have to.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I think you bring up a good point. From a practical standpoint, from an operational standpoint, you're correct. Resolutions are easier to adopt, they're easier to, bring forward. And with regard to the draft that you're looking at here, this might not be a bad option for a resolution to be considered. The ordinance, I think, that you're considering for the Code of Ethics is a bit different in that you are talking about public censuring and potential removal and those kinds of things, and not to mention the fact that there are other ties with statute that the ordinance alludes to as well. This doesn't necessarily have that connection, and so in my opinion, and again speaking from a practical standpoint, not a law standpoint, that's not out of line in my opinion.
I see a council policy as being a reasonable thing to do.
Do you have an opinion on this, John?
I'll tell you, when I was looking at this, I just thought this seems like it should be something that you should be cognizant of, and really something that is a body, if you adopt and say this is really our standard, that should be your standard. So it would be more like a guideline, a legal violation. And so I think you could go with a resolution with that. A violation of this wouldn't lead to some type of a code of ethics violation where you can either be censured or potentially removed from office. So I would think you would be, it's certainly up to you if you want to have some type of more severe look at that or adopt it in a different way. But at least in my mind, I was thinking that social media, it's kind of an evolving beast currently, and probably will continue to be for a number of years. So just to provide some guidelines and something so that the mayor and the vice mayor can pull somebody aside and say, oh my gosh, I saw that, remember our policy here, and hopefully that would do the trick. And then I guess my other question would be just, are we talking then about basically the social media policy that the city has adopted, and part of the shorter one, which I was actually contemplating, because I know that the city one has some provisions in it that really wouldn't apply to council members, or would you like just a combination for me to take a look at for a future work session?
Question? Steve?
When I was reading that on that social media policy, that almost sounded to me like I was reading that original employee handbook I got 6.5 years ago. Is that basically the council votes, you may be on the losing side, but that's the way it's going to be, and that's where you have to go. And if you were on the dissenting side, you can say, this is council policy. However, I personally did not necessarily support it and have your reasons, and that should be perfectly honest. But this is what we're going to do, and this is where we're going, because to coin the old phrase, you ride for the brand.
Since these were kind of combined together into one item this evening, is there, could people imagine a scenario where the violations of the social media policy could be so egregious that they would end up being a violation of the Code of Ethics?
Yes.
And if so, should the Code of Ethics and somehow reference these expectations that are in the social media policy?
Mr. Mayor, I think that there's one thing, if we're talking about using the city's platform in essence, or city issued hardware and that kind of thing. I think that's kind of one thing. If you're talking about just general freedom of speech and freedom of expression, you know, we don't give that up just because we become a member of this group. If I have an opinion that council did something wrong, I should still be free to express that opinion. I'm not really certain that that's as unlimited of a freedom if I'm sitting here spreading it by means of the platform of city government. And so I think that's something that we really kind of need to think about too, is number one, we all have freedom of expression and speech, but number two, is that limited when we're utilizing the city's platform, and if so, to what extent, and that.
Because, you know, we are talking about restricted speech, and that's a serious matter, Steve.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's kind of where I was headed with it too, is that we've had previous discussions about circumstances that have taken place, and realistically, if a council member has, this is council members' city council page, and they're on, that's one thing, but if they're on their own personal social media platform and they are instructing people to do certain things to keep themselves out of trouble or whatever it might be, if they're doing something that you just wouldn't expect them to do or say, the argument is it's their page and they have a right to say what they want to say. And so I see that becoming a problem. I don't agree with that, but I mean, we can't violate somebody's right to be able to say what they want to say, but there's got to be a happy medium to where you should be smart enough that you're in this position and people are going to pay attention to you. It doesn't matter whether you go on there and say I'm a city council member or whatever. People are going to listen to what you have to say, and the message you send needs to be the right message.
Well, and that's what I was looking at Q on this. Do not endorse commercial products. Remax, home group, selling houses. Do not endorse that. Service, politic parties, Republican, Democrat, Independent, whatever. Politics candidates, whoever, groups or entities. Groups could be considered as one of the ski groups, or hockey groups or something, or entities. So by putting that in there, you just, what can I say then on whether it's my own personal Facebook, or if I want to comment on something that President Trump did or something, I can't. According to this, it says do not endorse commercial, well, endorse, but you just limited your in ways.
But I think there's a difference here, Ken. This is talking about using the city's platform itself as opposed to your personal Facebook page.
But I am the city's. If I have my own Facebook page and I want to endorse something on my personal Facebook, but like you just said, my name's stamped to it. My name is stamped to council. Right?
No. I think that's why the majority of us have separate social media pages. The average person can't go and see my personal page. It is private. There are pictures of my children. It's my personal life. My councilwoman page can be accessed by anyone. And I do censor that information, and I am more careful with it. Those are two very different things.
I guess I'll ask you that question as well then, John. Do you think that there is a need for the Code of Ethics to somehow reference egregious violations of the social media policy? Or does that just create another quagmire for us?
I tell you, under freedom of speech, and people looking at something, you retweet this, say that it was violent with the policy. What was that a violation? It just makes, in my mind, when you start talking about communication, you just hope that people have good sense and they're going to have to live with their consequences. think the distinction is good that Councilwoman Lutz describes, that you have your personal page, you should be able to say virtually anything on that. But when you say this is my page is councilperson for Ward 3 or Ward 2 or whatever, maybe you should be more restrained and have some type of semblance of a council member making your arguments pro or against a particular position. But yeah, I do think maybe Mr. Claire's comments in that regard, if you start talking about freedom of speech, social media outlets, you might be looking for some fights you don't want to end up getting into.
It's a little different to use your position for financial gain that can be identified and proven versus saying something that might be inflammatory or partisan or whatever, which is a matter of free speech. So
Mr. Mayor, I'm always reluctant to hold myself up as any kind of a paragon of virtue or anything. But one of the reasons that I have a little tag right up there in the upper left corner of this is to remind myself that everything that I do and say on here is city business, not my business or not my feelings. And I think that this policy that Carter, that you've signed for the city employees really addresses about 99.99% of everything that we're talking about. This tells people, when you're talking on behalf of the city, this is what you can and cannot do. You know, it doesn't attempt to stifle them about what they want to do on their own. And I think that is the way it should be. I think it's the way it should be for all of us too.
So I guess from a direction requested standpoint, the suggestion was that we give Mr. Henley the task of pulling together the brief policy that was in our packet with the policy that city employees must follow and provide us with a resolution. Am I getting it? Are we far enough along where that guidance is sufficient, or do you need more from us to take on that task, Mr. Henley?
I can certainly take on the task, but I would ask you to examine it carefully as we proceed. Sure.
So it'll be a draft and nothing more.
We're talking a resolution, or
Yes.
we're talking a policy, or are we talking?
I think the proposal is that we have a proposed resolution, if I'm hearing.
I would like to see it as a resolution.
I would too.
Is everyone okay with that? With the full understanding that John will do the best he can, but, you know, we haven't really given him much specific information as far as what should or shouldn't be in there. So we probably need robust discussion on some. Okay. Everybody okay with that then?
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that work, John.
Mr. Mayor, can I ask one more thing before we get away from this part of the agenda? What council seems to be very interested in receiving some broader feedback as it relates particularly to the code of ethics portion of this discussion. We could certainly put together one of those portals relating to gathering citizen feedback pertaining to this ordinance, if that would be of interest to you, similar to what we did for the animal care and control ordinances that you considered here not too long ago.
Is everyone okay with that? The more feedback, the better.
Predict that we won't have as many responses.
I'm guessing not.
I want to keep my prediction record.
Okay, well, we're not too bad. We're 15 minutes behind. That's not too bad. So, I need to use the restroom. So, can you start on wayfinding? And I'll be
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Council is familiar with this concept to some degree, in that we talked about this as a part of your council goals not too long ago, wherein this is considered at least in one degree a matter of marketing our community to not only those who live here, of course, but those who visit. The other side of this discussion that we've had before is with regard to the use of the term wayfinding as being a little bit colloquial and perhaps jargonistic, but very critical as it relates to accessing federal funding. And so we like this term because it gives us some of those opportunities. Nonetheless, we would like to move forward on a wayfinding master plan and ultimate implementation. And we've asked Mr. Clokey here and Ms. Becker to walk us through the steps necessary to have this discussion and ultimately successfully garner federal funds and or other funds to, like I said, hopefully implement a plan that I think is a nice enhancement to our community. So if it pleases the council, I'd be happy to turn time over to Mr. Clokey and go from there.
All right, so like City Manager said, we're in the process of looking to kick off the wayfinding master plan next month. And I just want to kind of give you a brief overview of what we've been up to and what you can expect over the next 6 months. So first, what is wayfinding? Just in case, it's just in case we need to touch on the basics. It's basically a catch-all for any type of signage, map, symbols, or any type of information at all that's used to help provide direction and orientation for people who live here and people who are visiting our area. So that could look anything like a sign that points you towards Independence Rock along the highway, or a sign downtown that tells you where the public restrooms are. And so we're looking at kind of all things for a variety of users and many different scales, which we'll touch on. But really, why now? This is, first and foremost, this is a goal that was identified in the comprehensive plan as key to creating more attractive gateways and making for a more attractive community, and is also identified in your council goals, which reflected the comprehensive plan. And third, it's really about customer service too. It's making sure that those who visit our community are able to get to their destinations quickly and easily without any issues, and are able to get around our community easily. Third, I guess the main technical reason is basically YDOT said we can't touch the signage within the right of way unless we have a plan in place. So this is really the impetus for why we're doing this. Scope, again, this is touching on a variety of users, either they are automobile drivers or somebody on our trail system, those going up to the mountain, going to the river, visiting our downtown. And then as far as where, this includes not only Casper, but also the county, Mills, Bar None, and Evansville, and also includes the state right away as well. As far as implementation, so this plan, the budget was approved by the MPO Policy Committee back in March for $100,000. As most of you know, MPO is federally funded. 90% of this project is funded with federal dollars. Comes down to around $6,900 for Casper's contribution. As far as implementation costs, that is yet to be determined. Throughout the planning process, we'll identify sources of funding, and then also identify exactly, really what we want out of the plan, how much that will cost, and as we go through the planning process, we will figure out some of those constraints. But I am, oftentimes when we enter a plan, we don't always know exactly, we may not know how much is going to need to implement it, but at this point, we do know, we have identified some sources of funding, and that's through some of our partners like the county, Platte River Trails, CVB, and the DDA, which is exciting for us because it means we can really hit the ground running come March when we complete this plan. Finally, timeline. So the RFP was initially released in May. Fast forward to June, we received 8 proposals. We had a selection committee that spent a lot of time reviewing these proposals and asking really good questions and really doing their homework. Did interviews in late July and have selected a consultant that we're currently in contract negotiations. That contract is set to go to you all for approval on September 3rd. Moving forward, we're looking to have kickoff events in the second week of September, And then this will be roughly a 6-month project ending in March. And so we're hoping we can have some kind of initial guidelines ready for capital planning so that we can really hopefully start getting some signs in place by the next fiscal year. So that's a brief overview of what we've been up to, kind of what this is all about, where we're going with it. Do you all have any questions for me?
Questions? Yeah. Does this come, Aaron, with a request that we fund the $6,900 at this point? And if so, where's that coming from?
You've already funded it through your fiscal year 20 budget. You are funding it through the MPO program, alongside with Mills, Evansville, Barnum, and the county, who also contribute to the MPO program.
And I'm sure you touched on this, but there will be a lot of public input, I assume, in this whole entire process as far as what are the... Okay.
Absolutely. That's first and foremost where we start, is with those kickoffs. We'll have, you know, at this time when we first introduce plans, it's always very vague. You might wonder why. But the reason is because we don't want to start making decisions until we talk to the public. And so phase 1 is reaching out to the public, getting a sense for what are the areas that we need to be focusing on. And then every iteration of any drafts that we have, we'll always reveal those to the public and look to get public comment. So that's where you see when we have design drafts, we'll also be having correlating public meetings.
Any other questions? Ken?
How is the public notified about the meetings, and how are you getting it out to the public saying, hey, yo, we're gonna have a meeting?
Yeah, so first, we'll take the September kickoff meetings, for instance. We will do a series of press releases. We will post it on the city's webpage and on our Facebook page. We'll also be working with the project committee and asking them, you know, we really reach out to our volunteers, so asking them to kind of spread the word. The MPO also has kind of an email list of roughly 900 people where we send out notifications about upcoming meetings. And also working with the MPO Citizens Committee. That Citizens Committee is represents each different town, Casper and the county. We ask them to also spread the word. If there are any other ideas, we're happy to hear those out, because again, that's really the basis for every project that we do. So.
Everybody okay with this, what we're hearing? Again, it says direction requested, so you're just wanting us to say go for it.
Right.
Everybody okay with going for it? Okay.
If I may ask a question, Mr. Mayor, I would like to ask, how would you like to give us feedback in the future? You know, we do work sessions, try to do Friday info packets, but if there's a preference that you have to give us input into this process, because it will go quickly, but we want to be able to catch you and get your input. So I guess I want to ask you beforehand, how do you prefer to give us feedback?
Comments? Kristen?
I mean, I think the info packet on the work session meetings are great. I would just ask, could you maybe add all of us to that email address that sends out the meetings and stuff like that? Because I mean, hopefully we'd all be able to attend, but if we wouldn't be able to attend, then maybe we could use our social media presence or just groups around town to push that as well.
Okay. Certainly.
And I would say, Aaron, as you talk about it in your management team meetings, if it's something you want to be sure that council gets a look at, you can always ask Carter to include a paragraph in his weekly summary to us too, and just say we discussed this in management team, and these are a few things that the group wants some feedback on.
Great.
So just to remind us.
Okay, so we'll do.
Okay. Well, folks, I think we can probably take a little break here because we're waiting for Carter and Tom to take us through the budget amendment. So, why don't we take a 5-minute break and hunt them down and then resume in 10 minutes still.
Mr. Mayor, do you recall who's the representative to planning and zoning?
I think it's fine.
Okay, I'll check with him then, but I know when I was the member of planning and zoning,
As far as wayfinding.
Aaron would send me notices, like things about that. And you may remember, what was it, Generation Casper?
Yeah.
And I used to make announcements about that at the end of our big council meetings, so that's another way we can get that out.
Speaking of assignments, you were on the water board at one time, weren't you, Steve?
Yeah. Yeah, I served on it for 4 years.
Okay, and that, and you would, you're already replacing Chris.
Yes.
So.
If that works.
Yeah, no,
Now I'm gonna kill him.
So
But,
I know Sean's been having a hard time getting to those as well, so, we may need to find someone else to serve on that board.
But do you want me to go ahead and go to those meetings?
Please.
Okay.
Because we're already, pretty regularly, we have 3.
Okay.
Even with Chris coming, so.
I already have that down for.
It does come with lunch.
Yeah, it does.
If somebody is overwhelmed, I literally have one, because I was supposed to be on that alcohol one, and they've never met me. They've never met.
They don't meet during the summer months.
Okay.
I just talked to Matt the other day. He's gonna reach out to you.
Okay.
Especially now because we've got all that tips training supposed to be like implemented now. So I'm sure in September they're gonna
Okay.
have a meeting.
Very good. I was just thinking that the other day. I was like, everyone has all these meetings, and I'm sitting here waiting, not pulling my.
I mean, again, I don't want to speak for Sean. I just know it's been tough for him. He hasn't asked to be relieved of that, but we always run the risk. You know, a couple of people are on vacation and somebody gets sick, and then you don't have a forum.
Yeah.
If someone is chronically not there.
But, and I believe, well, and those positions are voting positions, so I believe actually it takes council action to appoint the people to be voting members. Now, I'm not gonna push that issue for next Tuesday, but that is something that you may wanna think about, and we may need to put on the agenda. Because I remember when I was leaving council, that was a big thing, was getting Chris appointed to that board so that he could go ahead and act as the voting member.
I didn't remember it that way, but.
Which board are you talking about?
CNFR.
The one that you're not on.
Well, the one I'm talking, the one we're talking about is the Joint Powers Water Board. The one that I said I was gonna kill you for was the CNFR.
There's a reason we got 4 seats on that one.
But if you
But all
can't ever
members of
make
the
that, I
general
mean,
public are.
oh yeah, because I did that for 4 years before Chris took that over.
That's what I was wanting to get, and then Chris was on it, so damn. Then he
That was the only reason I put my name in to volunteer for Ward 3, was I get back on that board.
5-minute break, we still have a minute left.
Very good.
About 2 weeks ago, we implemented what's called the
So yeah, I've got meetings on both gates on both sides.
Oh, okay.
So we get the full package from whether it's the water board or the power board. And it's really
I
handy.
just need to find part of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
It's on the mood today.
you'll get an email.
I'm leaving in 11 hours.
Okay.
That's really good.
What do you think?
Packet.
Take my chemical.
Oh, I think last weekend.
So they come out like.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Long range contribution plan and whatever.
And where's he going?
And they're putting
Boise.
that together.
Yeah.
Short 10 hours.
Oh, okay.
At least it's not too far. My 6-year-old told me the other day that he's going to college in New York City. I was like, oh, good. So now I'm gonna have to have like an apartment in New York City. Like, great. Just what I need.
Okay, I guess our 5 minutes are up, so, Mike, are you guys ready to talk about the budget amendments? Carter?
Yes, sir,
Here.
absolutely.
I thought we already voted on it.
So what is this budget amendment?
Just trying to put you ahead.
Okay, Carter, you're on.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thanks for the little break. I really appreciate that. For the budget amendment this year, we really have, or this time of the year, I should say, we really have two major things that we're trying to accomplish. And to go through that, I'd like to start with attachment A that's in your packet. It's a spreadsheet here that doesn't look near as scary as attachment B, but we'll get there in just a minute here too. Attachment A is a representation of what traditionally amendments are used for, which is to sometimes correct allocations and so forth that have been made into the appropriate funds and so forth, which you see a lot of here, or to fund projects that have come from the council during the interim period between the passage of the budget and the decision of the council, whatever that might be. A good example of that would be with regard to this $108,000 entry for the BOMAC system. That is one of those projects that came forward in an interim period. One of the things I want to ask though, we talked about two funding options here, one of which was the available fund balance in the general fund or the 1% fund. I seem to recall that we settled on the 1% fund to fund that project. Is that correct?
Anybody else remember that clearly?
I can't say
What
that.
percent?
The 1%, I think. So.
That's what I thought too.
Remember
Okay.
that it was a semi-infrastructure sort of matter because you're buying something that's gonna be used for a long period of time.
And public safety as well, so, yeah. Okay, well, we will make that correction on the spreadsheet here. But a good example, another good example of what is eating up this $1 million, if you will, in regards to what we consider both reallocating and or new projects, if you will. That $375,000 that you see next to the 1% 16 entry, that is what would be 1/4 of what it is that council awarded to the Platte River Trails Trust in the 1 cent 16 funds that they were authorized through the 1 cent process that y'all approved earlier in the year. The problem is that did not get put together in the FY20 budget, and so we're wanting to use the amendment to make that correct and appropriate with regard to what likely will come forward from the Platte River Trails Trust in the projects that they want to accomplish at this end of the 1% cycle. Nothing new really, but certainly something that wasn't included in the FY20 budget. With regard to that next entry under 1 cent 15, you'll see a $418,000 entry. This is kind of an odd entry in that it is really needed to balance out projects that you have approved in previous years through 1 cent 15 that aren't complete yet, but yet haven't been completed with the dollars necessary to carry over from previous years to make those projects complete. And so it's a bit of an odd entry because you generally will see that in carryover forms, like we're going to go over here on attachment B here in a second. But given that the character of this is just a little bit different, you see it here on this attachment. Again, not new projects. These are projects that have been approved by previous councils, but have not, for whatever reason, been carried over appropriately from year to year. Okay.
Mayor, can you just give an example of one of them?
Mr. Pitlick, can you or Andrew give me an example of one of those? We'd have to probably refer to the reference material.
Your Honor, Counsel, talking to Tom just right now, I think the senior center might be one of those where they've had 1 cent allocations that they now have a remodel going on for their facility.
contract through with council for use of 1 cent funds?
Again, not inconsistent with what's been approved in the past, just not carried over appropriately from the past. That's one example.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, this money that we're talking about, $418,000, that would be coming out of 1% 15 funds?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Let's see. One more example of how this aspect of the amendment works. If you'll look down towards the bottom, you will see a $411,000 entry for the PSEC fund. You are all familiar with this project and giving your thumbs up on this project happening. However, with regard to the FY19 budget, it was listed inappropriately in the 1 cent capital fund. What we're suggesting is that it should be coming out of the PSEC fund, not 1 cent. And so that's just really just a journal entry, for lack of a better way to describe it, that this amendment really is helpful to help us correct. Those are the major entries with regard to attachment A. A lot of this is cleanup and, again, settling out the appropriations in the appropriate funds, but there are some new allocations in here as well. Any questions on attachment A before we go on to attachment B? We can entertain.
Just a question. I noticed we're limiting a position at Hogadon, and part of what we did with the Leisure Board suggestion was, in Tim's work, was to basically create a goal for all of our managers to meet as far as a certain level of subsidy. Would that be an example of a decision made by the Hogadon manager, for example, to try to make that goal?
Mr. Mayor, I'll take a crack at that, and maybe if Mr. Cortez has additional information. Basically, what we've had here with regard to that particular position is the retirement of an employee that allowed us to consider whether or not an employee funded to that capacity was necessary for that operation. And so in Mr. Cortez's insight and direction, he is suggesting that that may not necessarily need to be the case, and is effectively allocating those dollars to other parts of his department. And that's really all it is. It does have the benefit for Hogadon as it relates to their cost recovery goals and so on, but that's not necessarily the impetus with this direction.
Just curious.
Tim, would you add anything beyond that?
Opportunity to kill 2 birds with 1 stone is how it's
Good question. I appreciate that. Okay. Attachment B. You're going to want to take a deep breath when you look at this attachment, and if you have any swear words you need to let out, I won't hold that against you at the Code of Ethics you're about to consider here coming up in a few weeks. That's a joke. I don't think that's in there. I don't think profanity is in the Code of Ethics, but you'll notice that the total carryover request for this particular amendment is $18.7 million. That is an unusually large, big number for an amendment. And I'll tell you basically what it is. We are effectively carrying over a number of projects from fiscal year 19 that, while approved, did not necessarily get started and or contracted for completion. And so I would suggest that this number is probably abnormally large. I don't anticipate you're going to need to see a number that big again in the form of a carryover amendment request. But what it does is it allows these projects to continue and allows them to be funded from previous year's allocations into fiscal year 20, which again is a real traditional use of an amendment. This number, on the other hand, being as big as it is very abnormal.
So this is basically an accrual of money we already allocated to be done next year. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
That's really what it is. Just large.
Mr. Mayor,
Sorry, Steve.
Mr. City Manager, is there a reason that we wound up with all of these carryovers? Did we just wind up with too much work and not enough staff, or did timelines get drug out, or weather conditions delayed projects, or D, all of the above?
I would probably say, since you gave me that option, D, all of the above.
Okay.
You'll notice some of these, for those of you who've been on the council for some time, are projects that have been talked about for quite some time. And so they are carrying over from previous years, and we believe we're going to get it done in fiscal year 20, basically. But a lot of what you discussed, Councilman, is a driver with regard to why you're seeing this collection of projects come forward in fiscal year 20. My hope is that fiscal year 20 is a very productive year for getting these things done, as well as getting projects done that we have scheduled for fiscal year 20.
Yeah.
So it could be a big year, a lot of work taking place, because I really don't like carrying this kind of accounting burden over from year to year, because I think it can lead to losing projects and having things fall through the cracks when you've got a number this big that you're kind of following over.
And look in there, we've got the wayfinding plan in there, and I remember us talking about wayfinding going back some time.
Right. Right.
So
That's a
now
good
it's
example. That's a good example.
This starts to explain why I can't get across town without going to Laramie and coming back, so.
We hope to fix it.
A lot going on. Could you remind us what the reservoir renovations are? That's a big number in the water.
Mr. Mayor, I actually had the opportunity to go and tour that particular project, and because it stood out to me as well, but I'd appreciate, Andrew, you cover it if you don't mind.
You're on the council, that's the 10 million gallon reservoir we just fight by our municipal golf course. It's buried, so a lot of people don't even know it's there. There's going to be a new roof, a new liner. The liner is failing in it, and some other structural repairs to that facility. You've also noticed that there's a carryover for the water master plan, which is now under contract with CPI. And we're beginning to think, do we really need 10 million gallons reservoir? And maybe we can go with a smaller tank there with an alternative tank or smaller tank somewhere north of town where we know we're having issues getting water to. So we're kind of waiting for the master plan to dictate, do we spend money on those repairs, or do we downsize it to a smaller system, put it in a smaller tank, north of town? But that's what that carryover was for. It was for a new roof, a new liner, and for some structural repairs.
It's an old tank.
It's an old tank, and it's a massive tank. It's the biggest tank in our system. 10 million gallons of water is a huge tank. Just to give you a comparison, the new tank we put on Wyoming Boulevard, the East Casper Zone 3 tank, is 400,000 gallons. So that just gives you a comparison as to how big this reservoir is underground.
And you said this was where?
Yeah.
Up by the municipal golf course. It's buried, so that a lot of people don't even, I put plenty of golf balls into it, which I'm completely out of bounds, I have no chance of getting, but, so.
I never knew that we had that there.
It's kind of behind where Grant School.
Exactly, yeah.
That's it.
Been there forever.
It's just southwest of
Yeah.
the old Granite Elementary.
Is that why we had those big pipes we had to move to put the YMCA in?
Yes, we moved some, I think 16-inch, which may not sound big, but from a pressure water system, it's a pretty big pipe.
It's all come together. All right, other questions about Amendment B? Anything else you want to tell us about, Carter?
Another one that you'll recall, or many of you will recall, is that Ice Arena Ice Chiller. You know that we've been talking about that for a couple of years, and for a lot of technical reasons, we've had to delay its completion. As you know, we're anticipating getting that done here this year as well, and so that's just another example of one of those projects that have carried over from year to year for a lot of reasons, and we're looking forward to getting that complete. But, otherwise, I'd certainly answer any other questions that you might have about these projects or about the amendment concept overall.
Anybody? Bob?
Just a quick one. I don't remember discussing thermal monitors for the compost charts. It sounds like a heck of a good idea to me, but I don't remember talking about it. We're talking like infrared monitors type thing.
We are. Andrew, do you want to answer that question if I may, Mr. Mayor?
All right, Council, I'm not sure I could add anything in addition to it. You're right, as to, peak signatures coming off the compost pile one day.
Okay. Thank you.
The second, this is a wastewater treatment plant, secondary rehabilitation project. Can you, I guess I'm not familiar with that, or maybe I am and I just don't remember.
Your Honor, Council, we can knock off the next agenda item on your list, to be quite honest with you. We're just talking about the reallocation of 1 cent 15 to the secondary treatment. You may recall that we've got CH Hill under contract for some isolation gates for the aeration basins, some RAS piping, some other valves, and they did some non-destructive testing on the secondary treatment process of the wastewater treatment plant. And that non-destructive testing identified some critical components that needed to be replaced. You know, some mixed liquor, 48-inch, I believe, a biosolid, biofuel, biosolids T, 60-inch T, and some other valves that need to be replaced. So that contract, or the estimate, blossomed from 1.1 to 2.2. I'm not looking at my memo right now, so but about $900,000 more. So now we're looking to reallocate some money from the Motor Control Center project to the secondary treatment to get that project properly funded, so we can get that out to bid. So.
Sorry to put this in plain terms, I apologize. So, because I toured that's that big piping underneath.
You're correct.
There is that. That's
in the pipe gallery. You see the 48-inch.
They you had to repatch it numerous times. Okay, I got it now. Thanks. Yep. Sorry.
Nope, no worries.
I'm assuming this is due to internal corrosion.
Yes, it's still pipelines. We're not expecting any type of catastrophic failure.
No,
it's absolutely internal.
But that's what your non-destructive testing was doing wall thickness checks.
And because of that testing, it identifies some critical components that are more critical at the wastewater treatment plant than the MCC project.
How old would a pipe like this be, Andrew?
You're probably looking at 50, 60 years, probably, maybe even forward.
Why do I have to rush into this
then? So that pipe is probably original equipment when that will go out there.
Yeah.
50 to 60 years.
When I toured it, the amount of patching that they did on it, and you see the numerous amount of patching, you wonder how in the world is that still there, but it's going strong. So yeah, I see why. Okay.
Let's go for 100 years.
Your Honor, Counsel, I won't be here.
So. Neither will we. How often do you do these tests? Or inspections, I should say.
Counsel, we don't do this non-destructive testing too terribly often. We do a lot of visual inspection, and we can identify a lot of issues visually before they become very catastrophic. But the nature of this pipe gallery, a lot of it is hard to visually identify and take a look at. So.
I had worked in an industry where, like every 3 years, you did something like this to make sure that your equipment wasn't deteriorating from the inside. Because you don't know what's going on inside most of that. It's
always a full screwdriver test.
Oh yeah. On a 1,000-pound vessel.
Yeah. I guess my comment is the word catastrophic is often overused, but in this case,
it may not be.
It would be a good thing.
And SFDH.
okay, any other questions for Andrew? I guess we did cover item 8 then.
We
Any
did.
questions about this reallocation? It's just a question of readjusting priorities, and we'll still get to the project that we're putting off.
Your Honor, Counsel, we'll rebudget that for fiscal year 21. So the FCC project's still an important project for us. It's just that the secondary treatment process is our priority.
I'd like to see how they're going to do that. I know that they got the big opening get the pipe in there, but I'd sure like to watch them put that together, because Wow, that's impressive.
Well, we could schedule a work session.
You, as big as that thing is, it amazes me how they're gonna do it, so.
I'd rather watch that by videos.
Keep your distance. Okay, no other questions, we can go on to agenda setting. Let's start with agenda for next week then, and make sure we're all comfortable with what we got going here. So, August 20th. Just feel free to comment as things jump out at you. If you have any concerns or questions about these items, need some more information about them before you vote.
Mr. Mayor, towards the bottom of the page, on the second page, the Golder Associates preparation amendment for landfill, is this just, what are we amending?
Tell us what that's about, Carter.
Well, I probably ought to let Andrew cover that just to be totally correct.
How are your knees holding up, Andrew?
It's my stomach, Your Honor. I'd have to have the memo, to be quite honest with you, to know. It's the air permit, I believe it needs to be amended.
Okay. Thank you.
Can you tell us about the property at 1129 East C Street and how we ended up demolishing that? Can you tell us about that, Liz?
Your Honor, that one, the property owner had passed away, and that property had fallen into massive disrepair, and there were vagrants camping out in that one. Our code enforcement division has worked on that now for months and have been able to get it demolished, worked with the deceased family member in order to get a lien assessed after this demolition. So it's a process that we go through, pretty extensive, but again, we've vetted it and dotted our I's and crossed our T's and gotten this property torn down. This one was rough.
But it's already gone.
Yes, it is.
Any other questions on the agenda before we move forward to the work session 4 weeks from now? Everybody okay with that? Okay. Let's take a look then at August 27th work session. We've already added a couple things. We continue our work on the code of ethics. And then I guess consider a draft resolution on the social media policy. We'll need to put both of those things on the agenda. We look to be pretty full after that. Does anybody have any burning issues they're wishing to add to the work session agenda?
Code of ethics needs to go on that work session.
Mr. Mayor, sometime back we talked about revisiting the idea of speed limits, not just the one on East Second Street, but other ones around town. And I think that, Andrew, were you guys gonna kind of look into that a little bit? I'm just wondering if anything has progressed on that. If I'm remembering that correctly, or.
Your Honor, Counsel, we've got some speed data on the Second Street portion, but unless you give me some direction as to where in town that you think need to be changed? I'll need some more information, I guess, from council as to where they think speeds are inappropriate for me to actually conduct the study.
Mr. Mayor.
We had kind of anticipated that we would ask you to bring it back kind of in the early fall here, to give us a little time to.
That's fine, and I presume that if any of us have any specific areas, we can just talk to you.
Well, I hesitate to say this, but I wonder if we shouldn't create a portal for that, to get public input.
It'll generate some attention.
It certainly would.
Oh, yeah.
Certainly would.
My favorite.
I'd like to do that, but I'd like to encourage people to not only just about East Second Street, but anywhere else in town. Because I know I got some places in town where I think our speed limit's just way too low. You know, 13th Street along the Tree Street south. You know, and some other parts of town. Maybe I'm the only guy in the world that thinks that way.
King Boulevard.
Yeah. I'm sure
Well,
there's.
and we got some feedback from specific neighbors that, you know, felt there were some safety concerns on their street. And
Yeah,
some
and
calming
maybe
measures.
higher, maybe lower, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that'd be a great idea.
It will generate a lot of feedback, and that doesn't require us to do anything, but we may notice some things that we didn't know about that really should be addressed, and it certainly gives people a chance to at least voice their concerns. So I guess I'd be in favor of just getting some public info from people, and just tell us where your concerns about traffic and about speeds, wherever they might be. And if we need to, you know, do some more studies based on the things that we hear, then we can do those. But yeah, I understand, there's nothing for you to report unless we say these are the areas we need to look at. We know we'll hear from a bunch of people about the hospital change, and that's okay.
The funny thing, they all complain about going downhill, none of them complain about the speed limit going east.
But let's keep that in mind, because we can't put it on the agenda for the 27th, and there's not enough time. And we may need to get more feedback before we can even schedule it.
Oh, that's fine with, doing it this fall, that's great.
Well, I think it's good for people who have concerns to know that we didn't forget all about it, and that we are gonna at least give them a chance to express their opinions, and we may make some changes based on that. Okay. All right. Anything else on the agenda for the 27th that's a concern? Everybody agree that we're full up and don't need to add anything? Well, it makes it easy. Okay. Anything we need to talk about legislative review? I'm sorry, Chris.
We're gonna do the agenda for September 10th. We've been doing it 4 weeks out.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. I was off base on that. Yes. Well, that's exactly what we need to. You said that.
We don't want to have to.
Wouldn't have gotten to it. Yeah, the 27th is set. So now we can put things on there as people think we should. So what do people want to do on the 10th of September? You've got your list of topics here.
Will that annexation report be completed by then?
I think so.
All right, let's pop that on there.
I'd recommend to put all staff
Yeah.
highlighted and recommended items.
Thank you.
Okay. How much time do you think we're talking about, Carter, on those 3 items?
I would say at least 20 minutes apiece. I think we could probably get it taken care of.
I don't wanna. I worry the parades would go longer than 20 minutes from recent experience.
It's hard to say.
I would agree with that. I think you need a little bit more time than 20 minutes.
All right, 30, 40?
40's probably
40?
good.
Okay, that chews up a bunch of time. Anything else that people are anxious to tackle?
Mr. Mayor, I think I saw somewhere that we were gonna be looking at the building code things again. Did I see that?
That is the property code revisions, it says anytime after March of 2019, so second item on the top. And I don't know if we're ready to do that in 4 weeks or want to start in on that. It's a big one.
No, with parade and special events guide, I'd say hold off a little bit longer on that. My personal opinion.
You know, I'm wondering if we looked at maybe like in October, to have a somewhat of a date certain for bringing that up, because I just hate seeing that just be put out there so far. I especially appreciated the memo that I saw, you know, talking about where that international code business comes from, especially because, and I'd like to see that publicized out to people.
That it's not a UN conspiracy?
Yeah. It's not being dropped on us by the CIA dark helicopters.
Exactly.
I think you're right. But we'll, in 2 weeks from now, we'll have an open agenda on the 24th of September, and that could be our default option at that point, is to pop that on there. I could call, go ahead, Ken.
No, it's okay.
I could call the 211 people. They approached me at the WHAM convention, or I guess I approached them, and they were explaining 211 is an information referral service that's statewide, that basically anyone can call with any kind of a problem, and their job is to direct them toward someone who can solve that problem.
Mm-hmm.
And it probably isn't utilized nearly as much as it could be. And so one of the things we can do with our work sessions is sort of publicize the service. And so they offered to come to a council meeting, and I don't think they would probably need more than 10 minutes. I could call them and see if they could come on the 10th, if council would like to do that.
If we add them, does that seem like a pretty full agenda?
That's the question. What do the rest of you think? Kind of depends on how anxious people are to get to other things. Yeah.
Well, I do want to say that, and I know I might have stuff thrown at me for this, but like the parking on parkways, that's been sitting there for a super long time that nobody's been wanting to touch, and it was brought to council. I think it's something that we need to discuss before the end of the year. I'm just throwing that out there. It's said clear back in January. That and then the David Street Station. I think those are two, maybe not this, but I think we need to bite the bullet and discuss.
Has there been any more discussion between the city and the DDA about creating that 501(c)(3)?
Mr. Mayor, there has been, and that is at various levels of being completed, but chances are we're not going to need to talk about that for some time yet.
We'll get through this summer.
For sure.
Things kind of
Oh yeah, yeah.
slow down a little bit for them. But, and they're currently operating under warm insurance, and they would have to come up with another way to insure their events if they stopped working under the umbrella of the city, which is a big deal. Am I correct on that, Liz?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I guess we could defer that for a little while.
Okay.
Okay. All right, well, I think our agenda's set then. Okay, let's go around. You got anything to tell us about them?
Oh, good question. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, so I'm gonna. Oh, yes. The birds, the parrots. I don't know about everybody else, but I've had my share of emails regarding it. Friday I did. I've had a lot of concerns about it. Went up Friday to see the birds, and I was amazed at how well Metro was taking care of the parrots. And it was cool. I was able to make a sound that one of the parrots mimicked me back and forth. That was super cool. Got to hear one of them actually, after they kind of calmed down with me being there, start to talk, and actually Pretty Bird and some other stuff, and that was really, really cool. Got pictures of them. Hearing that North Carolina, some folks from North Carolina heard about this and sent toys and things like that for the cages, for the birds, free, no cost. People going in there, professionals, checking them weighing them, making sure that they were gaining weight, even the ones that had the virus. Just the amount of care that they really put into those birds. I want to say Metro did an amazing job. The people there, I was really impressed. Just FYI on that.
Were all your emails supportive of what we're doing?
No,
Don't think so.
not a single one. Not a
Did
single.
they understand what we were doing?
No, the bottom line, they were not pleased with. To be honest, a lot of them was not pleased with the Gabriel Foundation sending them there. Thought they should stay local, to stay here. Some thought it was a way to get revenue, which it was never about us getting revenue, and I will repeat that one more time. The birds was not about Casper receiving revenue of selling the birds. We were concerned about, I want to believe Metro and everybody was concerned about their health and welfare. So I got a lot about that, about why don't you sell it and it could make money. It wasn't about us making money. It better not have been, I guess I should say. But it was about the health of each bird. They thought it should stay with local groups, and then to find out, I think it was Sunday, where the birds were going and then the birds were gone, people were not pleased about that. A lot of people were not pleased about how that all went down. You know what? The birds are taken care of. I did send an email to Carter that asking that we keep in contact with how the birds are doing and maybe be able to report that. And I told one that I will try to find out who will be keeping contact with Gabriel and where the birds or how the birds are doing. And so I told them that we'll try to do that. So this one my biggest thing is Metro did an amazing job taking care of, and it was wonderful. The community and obviously the United States, clear North Carolina, to care so much about these birds that they did what they could to help them. So kudos to everybody that was involved with that, I'd say. Other than that, that's all I got.
Kristen?
Nothing tonight.
Steve?
Tuesday's meeting last week was not my fault.
No, thank you.
Mike?
It was too. We haven't had one like that until you came.
That's my story, but I'm sticking to it.
I apologize for my flippant comment towards Kathy, but no, I don't have any.
The only thing for me is lots going on with the opportunity zones. We have Congresswoman Cheney coming Thursday morning with, I believe it is the director of, I can't remember the exact name of the group that's overseeing the opportunity zone development, which is a multi-agency project to use essentially tax incentives to create development in distressed areas. And just as a reminder, we have 4 opportunity zones in Casper and Mills, and this really becomes a marketing challenge because funds are being developed that will be invested in these zones for various kinds of projects. But the projects themselves have to be marketed to these investors. There's also public funds available for completion of projects, And we are going to be pitching very hard for some federal funding to help us complete the Midwest Avenue project, which is our primary goal. And so our task is to persuade them that this is a good investment, that it's going to stimulate our economy, but also improve the lives of marginalized populations in our community, and by giving them jobs and better housing options, et cetera. And so I will be, we're doing a little prep session tomorrow, and then I will be meeting with, along with Carter and the Mayor of Mills, meeting with Congresswoman Cheney and these federal representatives of the program, basically pitching Casper and why Casper is a great place to spend some money and make investments that will pay off over the long term. And so, and Mills will make their own pitch, and the county will also be there making their pitch. So, anything you want to add about that, Carter, that they should know? And then I'm also, Carter and I are also traveling back to DC the 18th to the 21st of September for the same reason. And we'll see if we can make some things happen with this, because the opportunities are immense. I couldn't have done that well. Go ahead.
Oh, no, that really captured it.
Liz, do you want to add anything?
Great.
Steve, and then Ken.
Is Kate involved in
Yes,
this?
Kate is very much involved.
Okay,
And
because I
in
heard
fact, they are
everybody else
organizing-
mention but them,
And
so.
Kate has done a wonderful job of putting together a prospectus. And
Okay.
that's what you have to have. Because people have to have specific things that, that they're willing to consider as investments. And so, the Hotel Conference Center has come up again as a potential investment for one of these funds. And, you know, with these tax incentives, it just pencils out so much better for someone that's looking at making these investments. And so, you know, we're just gonna try to tell them that it pencils out better than anything else they can put their money into. So, Ken?
I'm sorry, I got one question, if you don't mind, Mayor. You brought up Midwest Avenue, but 5th Street construction, is there a date that will be completed? I've had 4 residents approach me regarding, that live in that area, that keeps on being blocked off in different manners to their homes. So I'm just wondering, is there a date that I could give them when that's gonna be completed?
Tell us about that.
Your Honor, Counsel, I assume you're talking about 5th Street between McKinley and Conwell. You'll be happy to know that the paving is done. So when you see blacktop going down, you know they're almost ready to scoot out. All they're doing now is raising utilities up to the surface and putting concrete diamonds around those. I expect it to be open by the end of this week, or the first part of next week.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Sorry.
Construction around the cemetery is such a challenge because you just don't have other ways to get across. So, thanks. Any other questions on the opportunity zones? Just wish us luck. We'll do our level best.
Politic well.
Right. Okay. Let's see, I guess we go out for a special session now, huh? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Head out to the.
Oh, we're staying here.
Oh, we can stay in here? Okay, I didn't realize that. All right, so I now call the August 13th, 2019 special council meeting to order. All council members, let's see, I'm sorry. Chairman would entertain a motion to, by minute action, excuse the absence of Councilman Pacheco and Councilman, our Vice Mayor Johnson.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Chair would entertain a motion to adopt the consent resolution for the memo of understanding with the Natrona County School District concerning school resource officers.
So moved.
Moved by
Second.
Mike, moved by Councilman Kathy, and seconded by Councilman Huber. City Manager report, please.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, this really is an amendment with regard to some of our current costs that are related to supporting the SRO program. as well as dealing with some of the issues pertaining to body cams and body cam footage. And so that really are the fundamental issues pertaining to these changes.
And I think we all saw the consent resolution, so any questions? Council members have? Any abstentions on this vote? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes. A notice of an executive session to take place at this date and during this meeting was given. We have a matter to discuss regarding property acquisition and personnel. Therefore, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn into executive session, and at the conclusion of that executive session, to reconvene the special meeting solely for the purpose of adjournment of the special meeting.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Councilman Hopkins, seconded by Councilman Friel. There being a majority of members present, and a motion to adjourn into an executive session having been moved and seconded, and that motion requiring a 2/3 majority of the council present. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. A greater than 2/3 majority of the council present voted in favor of the motion. We are hereby adjourned into an executive session.